Petitioners Simon Fernan, Jr. and Expedito Torrevillas seek the reversal of the December 4, 1997, decision of the SB in the consolidated criminal case, finding them guilty of multiple instances of Estafa through falsification of public documents, and the subsequent August 29, 2000 SB resolution, which denied their separate pleas for reconsideration. Petitioner Fernan, Jr. disputes the adverse judgment in only 6 cases, while Petitioner Torrevillas seeks exoneration in 9 cases. Both petitioners assert their strong belief that their guilt has not been established beyond reasonable doubt, and, hence, exculpation is in order. The SB called the facts this way. On June 21, 1978, COE Regional Director Sofronio Flores, Jr. of COE Regional Office No. 7, directed auditors Victoria C. Coyada and Ruth I. Paredes to verify and submit a report on sub-allotment advices issued to various highway engineering districts in Cebu, particularly the Cebu City, Cebu First, Cebu Second, and the Mandaue City Highway Engineering districts. Complying with the directive, they conducted an investigation and in due course submitted their findings. Their report, Exhibit C, confirmed the issuance of fake letters of advice of allotments, LAs, in the districts mentioned. They discovered that 2 sets of LAs were received by the districts. One set consists of regular LAs, which clearly indicated the covering sub-allotment advices, and were duly signed by Mrs. Angelina Escaco, Finance Officer of the MPH Regional Office. The LIs were numbered in proper sequence and duly recorded in the logbook of the Accounting, Budget, and Finance Division. The other set consists of fake LAs which do not indicate the covering sub-allotment advice and were signed by Chief Accountant Rolando Mangabat and Enger Jose Bagasao instead of the Finance Officer. These fake LAs were not numbered in proper sequence. They were mostly undated and were sometimes duplicated. They could not be traced to the files and records of the Accounting, Budget, and Finance Division. The accounting entry for the disbursements made on the fake LAs was debited to the Accounts Payable Unliquidated Obligations 881400 and credited to the checking account with the Bureau of Treasury 870790. Nevertheless, the expenditures were taken from obligations of the current year, 1978, because all the BIR supporting papers of the payment vouchers were dated in that year. The entries in the journal vouchers filed with the MPH Regional Office were adjusted every month to 881400, unliquidated or prior year's obligation, 88300, liquidated or current year obligations, and 870700, Treasury Agency account. All of these were approved for the Finance Officer by Chief Accountant Rolando Mangabat. Mangabat, however, had no authority to approve them because since October 1977, he had already been detailed to the MPH Central Office. There were indications that the practice had been going on for years. Due to these serious irregularities, then President Marcos created a special cabinet committee on MPH Region 7 Ghost Projects Anomalies, which in turn organized a special task force composed of representatives from the Finance Ministry Intelligence Bureau, FMIB, National Bureau of Investigation, NBI, the Bureau of Treasury, and the Commission on Audit. The mission of the task force was to conduct a wider and more extended investigation in all the 1515 highway engineering districts of MPH Region 7, including the Cebu First Highway Engineering District, the 1977 questionable disbursements of which are the subject matter of these cases. For a better understanding of these highways cases, the flow and the release of funds to the various agencies of the government, and the control devices set up for disbursement and accounting of public funds should first be explained. A chart, Exhibit B, graphically shows the flow of allotments from the ministry down to the district level. On the basis of appropriation laws, and upon request made by heads of agencies, the then Ministry of Budget released funds to the various agencies of the government by means of an advice of allotment, AA, and a cash disbursement ceiling, CDC. The advice of allotment is an authority for the agency to incur obligations within a specified amount in accordance with approved programs and projects. The cash disbursement ceiling is an authority to pay. Upon receipt of the AA and CDC from the budget, the central office of the agency prepares the sub-advice of allotment, SAA, and the Advice of Cash Disbursement Ceiling, ACDC, for each region, in accordance with the disbursement allotment. These are sent to the regional office. Upon receipt, the budget officer of the region prepares the corresponding letters of advice of allotment, ALA, which are forwarded to the various districts of the region. The amount that goes to each district is already indicated in the advice of allotment. Only upon receipt of the LAA is the district office authorized to incur obligations. Now, how are funds released by the regional office to the different districts and ultimately paid out to contractors? The district engineer submits to the regional director a request for allotment in accordance with the program of work prepared by the former. This procedure starts with the preparation of a requisition for supplies and equipment, RSE, in the district office by the senior civil engineer, approved by the district engineer, and signed by the chief accountant of the highway engineering district, who certifies as to the availability of funds. The RSE is then submitted to the regional director for approval. Once it is approved, a request for obligation of allotment, ROA, is prepared by the chief accountant of the district senior civil engineer. The ROA signifies that a certain amount of district funds has been set aside or earmarked for the particular expenditures stated in the RSE. On the basis of the OA, the district office puts up advertisements, conducts biddings, makes awards, and prepares purchase orders, which are served on the winning bidder. The district office also prepares a summary of deliveries with the corresponding delivery receipts and tally sheets, conducts inspection, and prepares the general voucher for the payment of deliveries. Once the general voucher GV has been prepared, the corresponding check in the form of a treasury check account for agency, TCAA, is drawn by the disbursing officer and finally released to the contractor. At the end of every month, the report of checks issued by deputized disbursing officer, RCIDD, is prepared, listing all the checks issued during that period. The RCIDDO is submitted to the accounting division of the region. Upon receipt of the RCIDDO, the regional office draws a journal voucher, debiting the account obligation, liquidated or unliquidated obligation, whichever is applicable, and crediting the account treasury check account for agency, TCAA. The RCIDDO is recorded in the Journal of Checks, issued by deputized disbursing officers, JCIDDO, and posted in the general ledger at the end of each month. Simultaneous with the flow of the RCIDDO, the ROAs are summarized in the Reports of Obligations Incurred, ROI, in the district office, once or twice a month, depending upon the volume of transactions. The ROI is then submitted to the regional office. Upon receipt of the ROI, the accountant of the regional office draws a journal voucher taking up the following entry, debiting the appropriation allotted 09000 and crediting the obligation incurred 082000. This is recorded in the general voucher and posted to the general ledger at the end of each month. The journal voucher is prepared, closing the account 870709 to 871100 at the end of each month. It is also recorded and posted to the general ledger. At the end of the month, the balances of each account shown in the general ledger are summarized in a statement called the trial balance. The trial balance is submitted to the MPH Central Office in Manila, where it is consolidated with other trial balances submitted by other regional offices. The elaborate accounting procedure described above with its system of controls was set up obviously to make sure that government funds are properly released, dispersed, and accounted for. In the hands of untrustworthy guardians of the public purse, however, it proved to be inadequate. There were loopholes which an unscrupulous person adroit in government accounting could take advantage of to surreptitiously draw enormous sums of money from the government. Sometime in February 1977, accused Rolando Mangibat, chief accountant, Dalia Priagido, accountant 3, Jose Sazin, budget examiner, and Edgardo Cruz, clerk 2, all of MPH Region 7, met at the Town and Country restaurant in Cebu City and hatched an ingenious plan to siphon off large sums of money from government coffers. Mangibat had found a way to withdraw government money through the use of fake LAAs, vouchers, and other documents, and to conceal traces thereof with the connivance of other government officials and employees. In fine, The fraudulent scheme involved the splitting of LAAs and RSEs, so that the amount covered by each general voucher is less than P50.00, to do away with the approval of the regional auditor. The charging of disbursements to unliquidated obligations due the previous year to provide the supposed source of funds, and the manipulation of the books of account by negation or adjustment, i.e., the cancellation of checks through journal vouchers to conceal disbursements in excess of the cash disbursement ceiling, CDC, so as not to reflect such disbursements in the trial balances submitted to the regional office. Mangibat enticed Priagido, Cruz, and Sazon to join him. All three agreed to help him carry out his plan. They typed the fake LAs during Saturdays. Cruz and Sazon also took charge of negotiating or selling the fake LAs to contractors at 26% of the gross amount. Priagido, on her part, manipulated the general ledger, journal vouchers, and general journal through negative entries to conceal the illegal disbursements. Thus, in the initial report of the auditors, Exhibit D, it was discovered that the doubtful allotments and other anomalies escaped notice due to the following manipulations. The letter advices covering such allotments, LI, were generally not signed by the finance officer nor recorded in the books of accounts. Disbursements made on the basis of these fake LIA were charged to the unliquidated obligations, account 881400, although the obligations being paid were not among those certified to the unliquidated obligations, account 881400, at the end of the preceding year. To conceal the overcharges to authorized allotments, account 881400 and the excess of checks issued over authorized cash disbursement ceiling, adjustments were prepared monthly through journal vouchers to take up the negative debit to account 881400 and a negative credit to the Treasury checking account for agency's account 870790. These journal vouchers in effect canceled the previous entry to record the disbursements made on the basis of the fake LIs. Thus, the affected accounts 881400 and 870790, as appearing in the trial balance, would not show the irregularity. The checks, however, were actually issued. The four formed the nucleus of the nefarious conspiracy. Other government employees, tempted by the prospect of earning big money, allowed their names to be used and signed spurious documents. Although the anomalies had been going on for some time, February 1977 to June 1978, the PNB and Bureau of Treasury had no inkling about it until the NBI busted the illegal operations. Some of the recipients of the stolen funds spent lavishly and bought 2 cars at a time. The reason for this is that, at that time, the PNB and Bureau of Treasury were not furnished copy of the mother CDC, and the local branch of the PNB did not receive independent advice from the PNB head office in Manila. There were no deposits of money made with the PNB from which withdrawals could be charged. Only CDCs were presented to it, and not knowing that some of the CDCs were fake, the PNB branch paid out the checks drawn against them. The bank had also no way of knowing what amount was appropriated for the district. Consequently, it did not know if the limit had already been exceeded. Only an insider steep in government accounting, auditing, and banking procedures, particularly their flaws and loopholes, could have pulled off such an ingenious and audacious plan. Focusing our attention now on the anomalies committed in the Cebu 1st District Engineering District, hereinafter referred to as the Cebu First Head for brevity, the court finds that the same pattern of fraud employed in the other highway engineering districts in MPH Region 7 was followed. The Cebu First Head received from Region 734 letters of advice of allotment, ALAs, in the total sum of P4 734,336.50 and 29, corresponding sub-advices of cash disbursement ceiling, SACDCs, amounting to P5,160,677.04 for the period January 1st, 1977 to December 31st, 1977. But apart from this, the Cebu First Head appears to have also received for the same period another set of 84 LAAs amounting to P4,680,694.76, which, however, could not be traced to any sub-advice of allotment, SIA, or matched to the advices of cash disbursement, ceiling, SEDCs, received from the MPH and regional office. This is highly irregular and not in consonance with accounting procedures. It was also made to appear that the payments were made for alleged prior year's obligations and chargeable to account 881400, obviously because they were not properly funded. Furthermore, the list of projects in Region 7 for 1977 showed that Cebu First had completed rehabilitation and/or improvement of roads and bridges in its districts from February to May 1977, with expenditures amounting to P613,812.00. On the other hand, the expenditures for barangay roads in the same district in 1977 amounted to P140,692.00, and these were all completed within the period from November to December 1977. These completed projects were properly funded by legitimate LAs and CDCs in a total amount of only P754,504.00. However, an additional amount of P3,839,810.74 was spent by the Cebu First Head for maintenance of roads and bridges for the same year, 1977, but the same could not be traced to any authoritative document coming from the MPH. A total of 132 general vouchers, emanating from fake LAAs and ACDCs, were traced back to Rolando Mangubat, Regional Accountant of Region 7, and Adventure Fernandez, Regional Highway Engineer, also of Region 7. Those LAACDCs became the vehicles in the disbursement of funds amounting to P3, 839,810.74, through the vouchers purportedly issued for the purchase and delivery of the aforementioned materials allegedly used for the maintenance and repair of the national highways within the Cebu First Head. Despite the enormous additional expenditure of P3,839,810.74, the roads and bridges in the district, as found out by the NBI, did not show any improvement. As testified to by several barangay captains, the road maintenance consisted merely of spreading a napog, or limestone, on potholes of the national highway. Obviously, the vouchers for payments of alleged maintenance of roads and bridges in the additional amount of P3, 839,810.74 were prepared for no other purpose than to siphon the said amount from the government coffer into the pockets of some officials and employees of Region 7 and the Cebu First Head, as well as the suppliers and contractors who conspired and confederated with them. The nuclei of this massive conspiracy, namely Rolando Mangubat, Jose Sazon, and Edgardo Cruz, all of MPH Region 7, were found guilty in all 119 counts and were accordingly sentenced by the SB. The other conniver, Delia Priagido, after being found guilty in some of the cases, became a state witness in the remainder. On the basis of her testimony and pertinent documents, informations were filed, convictions were obtained, and criminal penalties were imposed on the rest of the accused. On the other hand, petitioners were both civil engineers of the MPH assigned to the Cebu First Highway Engineering District. Petitioner Fernan, Jr. was included among the accused in criminal case Nus. 2879, 2880, 2881, 2885, 2914, and 2918 allegedly for having signed 66 tally sheets or statements of deliveries of materials, used as basis for the preparation of the corresponding number of general vouchers. Fund releases were made to the suppliers, contractors, and payees based on these general vouchers. Petitioners were charged with the complex crime of Estafa through falsification of public documents as defined and penalized under Articles 318 and 171 in relation to Article 48 of the Revised Penal Code. The complex crime is pruned into the following essential elements. For Estafa, deceit. Deceit is a species of fraud. It is actual fraud and consists in any false representation or contrivance whereby one person overreaches and misleads another to his hurt. There is deceit when one is misled, either by guile or trickery or by other means, to believe to be true what is really false. Damage. Damage may consist in the offended party being deprived of his money or property as a result of the defraudation, disturbance in property right, or temporary prejudice. For falsification, that the offender is a public officer, employee, or notary public, that he takes advantage of his official position, that he falsifies a document by committing any of the acts defined under Article 171 of the Revised Penal Code. Before the SB, a Memorandum of Agreement, MOA, dated September 1st, 1988, was entered into between the state and the accused. As a result of this MOA, a testimony of state witness Petitioners on the modus operandi of the conspirators, or the unique and distinct method of procedure by which the malversation of public funds in Region 7 of the MPH was perpetrated and accomplished, dealt a major blow to the defenses raised by petitioners. Petitioners' vital testimony, wherein she identified the methods, documents, exhibits, and other pertinent papers that led to the crafting of fake letters of advice of allotment, lies, general vouchers, disbursement of funds for non-existent projects, general vouchers, and other documents, was not even successfully refuted or overturned by petitioners. Petitioners confirmed and admitted under oath that the illegal disbursement of public funds pertained to non-existent projects and was supported by fake alias, fake general vouchers, and other pertinent papers that were also falsified. The fake alias and general vouchers were, in turn, supported by signed tally sheets that pertain to alleged ghost deliveries of road construction materials for non-existent or illegal projects. On the part of petitioners, they readily admitted that they either signed the tally sheets and/or delivery receipts, reports of inspection, requests for supplies and materials, and other related documents which became part of the supporting documents that led to the issuance of general vouchers and eventually the disbursement of public funds. The tally sheets are statements of delivery that purportedly indicated the specified quantities of materials for the construction and maintenance of roads that have been delivered on supposed project sites on given dates at specific places. As a result of petitioners' signatures in the tally sheets and/or delivery receipts, reports of inspection, requests for supplies and materials, and other supporting documents, which became the basis for payment to suppliers, public funds were released via general vouchers and checks to the said suppliers, despite the fact that the latter did not make any deliveries in accordance with projects allegedly funded by mostly fake LAAs. The accusation that there were no actual deliveries of road construction and maintenance materials in support of projects or otherwise funded by LAs was proven true by the testimonies of the various barangay captains and residents of the barangay who were supposed to be benefited by the construction and repair activities of the Cebu First Highway Engineering District. The inescapable conclusion from the aforementioned testimonies of the barangay captains and residents of Cebu, whose respective barangay are traversed by the national highway, is that there were no actual major repair works undertaken on the national highway except the filling of potholes by crushed limestone, anapog. Clearly, there were no deliveries of supplies and materials for asphalting and repair of roads described in the tally sheets and other supporting documents signed by petitioners. Glaring is the finding of the SB that the Cebu First Highway Engineering District, to which petitioners were assigned, had fake LAAs totaling to PHP 4,924,366.50, while the fake cash disbursement ceilings issued amounted to PHP 6,271,150. The Cebu First Highway Engineering District had also issued checks per unrecorded reports in the total sum of PHP 1,135,176.8243. Therefore, the total illegal disbursements in the Cebu First Highway Engineering District alone were a staggering PHP 12,330,693.32 circa 1977. Of this total, Petitioner Fernan, Jr. freely admitted signing tally sheets which pertained to non-existent deliveries of road construction supplies and materials totaling PHP 146,000, including PHP 27,000 in criminal case No. 2,914, where Petitioner Torrevillas was among the co-accused. These tally sheets were attached as the supporting papers to fake general vouchers, which facilitated the release of check payments to suppliers. These checks were allegedly paid to suppliers Juliana de Los Angeles and Ismael Sabio, Jr. On his part, Petitioner Torrevillas voluntarily admitted to signing tally sheets, reports of inspection, requisitions of supplies and equipment, and other pertinent documents totaling an even greater amount of PHP 337,861.01, including PHP 27,000 in criminal case No. 2914, where Petitioner Fernan Jr. was among the co-accused 48. These documents signed by Petitioner Torrevillas were likewise attached as supporting papers to fake general vouchers, which facilitated the release of check payments to suppliers. These checks were allegedly paid to suppliers Rufino V. Nunez, Juliana de Los Angeles, Ismael Sabio, Jr., and Manuel Mascardo. These general vouchers and checks could not be traced to genuine LAAs. Ergo, there were no actual deliveries of supplies and materials for the road repair and rehabilitation in Region 7, which were the subjects of the criminal cases where petitioners were charged. The Supreme Court found no reason to disturb the findings of the court, a quo that all the essential elements of the crime of Estafa through falsification of public documents were present. There is no question that petitioners, at the time of the commission of the crime, were public officers, civil engineers assigned to the MPH. Their signing of tally sheets and related documents pertaining to the alleged deliveries of supplies for road repair and construction constitutes intervention or taking advantage of their official positions, especially considering that they had the duty to inspect the purported deliveries and ascertain the veracity of the documents and the statements contained in them. The tally sheets bearing their signatures contained false recitals of material facts which the petitioners had the duty to verify and confirm. These tally sheets were attached as supporting documents to fake LEA and subsequently became the basis for the disbursement of public funds to the damage and prejudice of the government. Indubitably, there exists not even an iota of doubt as to petitioners' guilt. The essential elements of Estafa through falsification of public documents are present in the cases against petitioners, as follows. Deceit. Petitioners Fernan Jr. and Torrevillas made it appear that supplies for road construction and maintenance were delivered by suppliers, allegedly in furtherance of alleged lawful projects, when in fact said supplies were not delivered and no actual asphalting or repair of road was implemented. In doing so, petitioners were public officers or employees at the time of the commission of the offenses, took advantage of their official position as highway engineers, and made untruthful statements in several narrations of fact. Damage. The government disbursed PHP 146,000 in the case of Fernan Jr. By way of defense, petitioners posit that the tally sheets and other documents could in fact be traced to genuine liens that were in the custody of the NBI. Unfortunately, these genuine IAs were not introduced in evidence. It is an age-old axiom that he who alleges something must prove it. Petitioners' assertion that the documents they signed were all genuine and duly covered by genuine LAAs was substantiated only by their own self-serving and uncorroborated testimonies. The Supreme Court hesitated to give much weight and credit to their bare testimonies in the face of clear, convincing, overwhelming, and hard evidence adduced by the state. If the genuine LAAs were vital to their defense, and they firmly believed that the documents were indeed in the custody of the NBI, then petitioners could have easily procured the compulsory process to compel the production of said documents. However, petitioners miserably failed to avail of subpoena duces tecum, which the court a quo could have readily granted. The inability to produce such important and exculpatory pieces of evidence proved disastrous to petitioners' cause. Their conviction was indeed supported by proof beyond reasonable doubt, which was not overturned by defense evidence. Petitioners vigorously claim error on the part of the lower court when it made the finding that they were co-conspirators with the other parties accused, despite the dearth of evidence to amply demonstrate complicity. The Supreme Court was not convinced by petitioners' postulation. Indeed, the burden of proving the allegation of conspiracy falls to the shoulders of the prosecution. Considering, however, the difficulty in establishing the existence of conspiracy, settled jurisprudence finds no need to prove it by direct evidence. In People v. Pagalasan, the court explicated why direct proof of prior agreement is not necessary. After all, secrecy and concealment are essential features of a successful conspiracy. Conspiracies are clandestine in nature. It may be inferred from the conduct of the accused before, during and after the commission of the crime, showing that they had acted with a common purpose and design. Conspiracy may be implied if it is proved that two or more persons aimed their acts towards the accomplishment of the same unlawful object, each doing a part so that their combined acts, though apparently independent of each other, were in fact connected and cooperative, indicating a closeness of personal association and a concurrence of sentiment. To hold an accused guilty as a co-principal by reason of conspiracy, he must be shown to have performed an overt act in pursuance or furtherance of the complicity. There must be intentional participation in the transaction with a view to the furtherance of the common design and purpose. In Estrada versus Sandigan Bayan, we categorize two structures of multiple conspiracies, namely, 1. The so-called wheel or circle conspiracy, in which there is a single person or group, the hub, dealing individually with two or more other persons or groups, the spokes. And 2. The chain conspiracy, usually involving the distribution of narcotics or other contraband, in which there is successive communication and cooperation in much the same way as with legitimate business operations between manufacturer and wholesaler, then wholesaler and retailer, and then retailer and consumer. The Supreme Court found that the conspiracy in the instant cases resembles the wheel conspiracy. The 36 disparate persons who constituted the massive conspiracy to defraud the government were controlled by a single hub, namely, Rolando Mangubat, Chief Accountant, Delia Priagido, Accountant 3, Jose Sazon, Budget Examiner, and Edgardo Cruz, Clerk 2, who controlled the separate spokes of the conspiracy. Petitioners were among the many spokes of the wheel. Mangubat enticed Priagido, Cruz, and Sazon to join him. All three agreed to help him carry out his plan. They typed fake LAs during Saturdays. Cruz and Sazon also took charge of negotiating or selling fake LAs to contractors at 26% of the gross amount. Priagido manipulated the general ledger, journal vouchers, and general journal through negative entries to conceal the illegal disbursements. In the initial report of COE auditors Victoria C. Coyada and Ruth I. Paredes, it was discovered that the doubtful allotments and other anomalies escaped notice due to the following manipulations. The letter advices covering such allotments, LEA, were not signed by the finance officer nor SIC recorded in the books of accounts. Disbursements made on the basis of these fake LIAs were charged to the unliquidated obligations, account 881400, although the obligations being paid were not among those certified to the unliquidated obligations, account 881400, at the end of the preceding year. To conceal the overcharges to authorized allotments, account 881400 SIC, and the excess of checks issued over authorized cash disbursement ceiling, adjustments were prepared monthly through journal vouchers to take up the negative debit to account 881400 and a negative credit to the Treasury checking account for agency's account 870790. These journal vouchers in effect canceled the previous entry to record the disbursements made on the basis of fake LAS. Thus the affected accounts, accounts 881400 and 870790, as appearing in the trial balance, would not show the irregularity. The checks, however, were actually issued. The four formed the nucleus of the nefarious conspiracy. Other government employees, tempted by the prospect of earning big money, allowed their names to be used and signed spurious documents. Focusing its attention now on the anomalies committed in the Cebu 1st District Engineering District, hereinafter referred to as the Cebu First Head for brevity, the Supreme Court found that the same pattern of fraud employed in the other highway engineering districts in MPH Region 7 was followed. The Cebu First Head received from Region 734 letters of advice of allotment, IAs, in the total sum of PHP 4,734,336.50 and 29 corresponding sub-advices of cash disbursement ceiling, SACDCs, amounting to PHP 5,160,677.04 for the period January 1st, 1977 to December 31st, 1977. But apart from this, the Cebu First Head appears to have also received for the same period another set of 84, amounting to PHP 4,680,694.76, which, however, could not be traced to any sub-advice of allotment, SAA, OR, matched to the advices of cash. Disbursement ceiling, ACDCs, received from the MPH and regional office. This is highly irregular and not in consonance with accounting procedures. It was also made to appear that the payments were made for alleged prior year's obligations and chargeable to account 81 to 400, obviously because they were not properly funded. Furthermore, the list of projects in Region 7 for 1977 showed that Cebu First Heady completed rehabilitation and or improvement of roads and bridges in its districts from February to May 1977, with expenditures amounting to P613,812.00. On the other hand, the expenditures for barangay roads in the same district in 1977 amounted to P140,692.00, and these were all completed within the period from November to December 1977. These completed projects were properly funded by legitimate LAAs and CEDCs in a total amount of only P754,504.00. However, an additional amount of P3,839,810.74 was spent by the Cebu First Head for maintenance of roads and bridges for the same year, 1977. But the same could not be traced to any authoritative document coming from the MPH. Payments for materials purchased for the year 1977 were made to appear as payment for prior year's obligation and were paid out of fake LAAs, totaling PHP 2,505,147.00. The NBI also discovered that there were purchases of materials in 1977 that were charged to current obligations, but paid out of spurious LAAs, totaling PHP 1,339,663.74. A total of 132 general vouchers, emanating from fake LAAs and ACDCs, were traced back to Rolando Mangubat, regional accountant of Region 7, and Adventure Fernandez, regional highway engineer, also of Region 7. Those LAs and ACDCs became the vehicles in the disbursement of funds amounting to PHP 3,839,810.74 through the vouchers purportedly issued for the purchase and delivery of the aforementioned materials allegedly used for the maintenance and repair of the national highways within the Cebu First Head. Despite the enormous additional expenditure of PHP 3,839,810.74, the roads and bridges in the district, as found out by the NBI, did not show any improvement. Exhibit 2. As testified to by several barangay captains, the road maintenance consisted merely of spreading a napog, or limestone, on potholes of the national highway. Obviously, the vouchers for payments of alleged maintenance of roads and bridges in the additional amount of P3, 839,810.74 were prepared for no other purpose than to siphon off the said amount from the government coffer into the pockets of some officials and employees of Region 7 and the Cebu First Heady, as well as the suppliers and contractors who conspired and confederated with them. After a close re-examination of the records, the Supreme Court found no reason to disturb the finding of the anti-graft court that petitioners are co-conspirators of the other accused, headed by Chief Accountant Rolando Mangubat, who were similarly convicted in practically all the 119 counts of Estafa. Undisturbed is the rule that this court is not a trier of facts, and in the absence of strong and compelling reasons or justifications, it will accord finality to the findings of facts of the SB. The feeble defense of petitioners that they were not aware of the ingenious plan of the group of accused Mangubat and the indispensable acts to defraud the government does not merit any consideration. The state is not tasked to adduce direct proof of the agreement by petitioners with the other accused, for such requirement, in many cases, would border on near impossibility. The state needs to adduce proof only when the accused committed acts that constitute a vital connection to the chain of conspiracy, or in furtherance of the objective of the conspiracy. In the case at bench, the signing of the fake tally sheets and/or delivery receipts, reports of inspection, and requests for supplies and materials by petitioners on separate occasions is vital to the success of the Mangubat Group in siphoning off government funds. Without such fabricated documents, the general vouchers covering the supply of materials cannot be properly accomplished and submitted to the disbursing officer for the preparation of checks. State witness Ruth Paredes, supervising SUA auditor, elaborated on the procedure regarding the award of the contract, more specifically to the payment of the contractor or supplier. Once the request for supplies and equipment is approved by the regional office, the request for obligation of allotment, ROA, or the request for funds is signed by the district engineer pursuant to the approved plans and budget and signed by the district accountant as to availability of funds. The district office will advertise the invitation to bid and award the contract to the lowest bidder. The purchase order, POE, is prepared and addressed to the winning bidder. Upon delivery of the supplies and materials, the supplier bills the district office for payment. Consequently, the requisitioning officer will prepare the general voucher, which must be accompanied by the following documents: the ROE, the PO, the abstract of bid together with the bid quotations, the delivery receipts together with the tally sheets, and the tax clearance and tax certificate of the supplier. After the preparation and submission of the general voucher and the supporting documents, the disbursing officer shall prepare and draw a check based on said voucher. The check is countersigned by an officer of the district office or the SUA regional director based on the amount of the check. Thus, it is clear that without the tally sheets and delivery receipts, the general voucher cannot be prepared and completed. Without the general voucher, the check for the payment of the supply cannot be made and issued to the supplier. Without the check payment, the defraudation cannot be committed and successfully consummated. Thus, petitioners' acts in signing the false tally sheets and/or delivery receipts are indispensable to the consummation of the crime of Estafa through falsification of public documents. Surely, there were ghost or false deliveries of supplies and materials, as convincingly shown by the testimonies of the barangay captains, officials, and residents of the areas where the materials were allegedly used. More importantly, if there were actual deliveries of materials made, then there would be no need to fake the lies, because the suppliers will have to be paid the cost of said materials, plus a reasonable profit. As a result, there is nothing or not much to share with the more than 30 or so co-conspirators, for the suppliers would not be too dim-witted to part with even their cost in buying the materials they allegedly supplied. Moreover, the fake delivery receipts and tally sheets signed by petitioners were linked to the general vouchers upon which check payments were made to the suppliers who were found guilty of participating in the fraud. With respect to Petitioner Fernan Jr., he signed tally sheets on the ghost deliveries of Juliana de Los Angeles and Ismael Sabio. Jr., on the part of Petitioner Torrevillas, he signed false tally sheets and delivery receipts on supplies allegedly delivered by Rufino V. Nunez, Juliana de Los Angeles, Ismael Sabio, Jr., and Manuel Miscardo. Lastly, the checks issued to these suppliers based on general vouchers supported by the false tally sheets and general vouchers signed by petitioners cannot be traced to any genuine LAA, resulting in the inescapable conclusion that these LAs were unauthorized, hence fake or fabricated. These are undisputed telltale signs of the complicity by petitioners with the Mangubat syndicate. In People v. Mangubat, the court a quo elucidated the conspiracy in the Cebu Highway Scam in a trenchant manner, where the acts of each of the accused constitute an essential link in a chain, and the desistance of even one of them would prevent the chain from being completed. Then no conspiracy could result, as its consummation would then be impossible or aborted. But when each and every one of the accused in the instant cases performed their assigned tasks and roles with martinet-like precision and accuracy, by individually performing essential overt acts, so much so that the common objective is attained, which is to secure the illegal release of public funds under the guise of fake or simulated public documents, then each and every one of said accused are equally liable as co-principals under the well-established and universally accepted principle that, once a conspiracy is directly or impliedly proven, the act of one is the act of all, and such liability exists notwithstanding no participation in every detail in the execution of the offense. In sum, the required quantum of proof has been adduced by the state on the conspiracy among the accused, including petitioners. The conviction of petitioners must perforce be sustained.
This is the brief on the 1977 Cebu Highway Scam. This Supreme Court ruling breaks down a massive 86 million peso government fraud, showing exactly how insiders exploited accounting loopholes to siphon public funds for ghost road repairs. How does a staggering amount of public money vanish into thin air without the banks or auditors noticing? First, the accounting manipulation. In 1977, officials led by Chief Accountant Rolando Mangubat created fake letters of advice of allotment. They split fraudulent vouchers into chunks under 50,000 pesos to bypass auditors, using negative journal entries to hide payouts. It's like a thief writing hundreds of tiny bad checks while simultaneously hacking the bank's database to erase the transaction history. Second, the ghost deliveries. Civil engineers Simon Fernan Jr. and Expedito Torrevillas signed fake delivery receipts for expensive asphalt. Yet local barangay captains testified no major repairs happened. Instead, workers just filled potholes with cheap crushed limestone called anapog. Why would ground-level engineers risk their entire careers just to sign delivery receipts for non-existent asphalt? Finally, the wheel conspiracy. The Supreme Court upheld the engineers' convictions for Estafa through falsifying public documents. The court ruled Mangubat's group was the central hub, and complicit individuals like the engineers were the spokes. Their signatures were the indispensable acts needed to issue checks. Like a bicycle wheel, masterminds sit safely at the hub, but without individual spokes, the entire wheel of fraud collapses and cannot roll forward. Ultimately, the Cebu Highway Scam stands as a stark reminder that no amount of brilliant accounting manipulation can hide a paper trail of ghost deliveries when the physical roads themselves remain broken.
In 1977, the Philippine government lost 86 million pesos in a single coordinated heist. Typical robberies rely on speed and force. This crime occurred entirely within the quiet of the regional bureaucracy. The tools of the trade were simple: typewriters, administrative red tape, and these specific handwritten ledger entries. Bureaucracy is designed to protect public funds, but to an insider, that complexity acts like a vault they know how to navigate. This diagram shows the intended pipeline for government funds as they move from the central ministry down to the local districts. The process begins when the Ministry of Budget releases funds using a document called an Advice of Allotment. Next, the regional office issues a Letter of Advice of Allotment, or LAA. This document authorizes local spending, but it requires a specific signature from a finance officer to be valid. Finally, at the district level, engineers request supplies, accounting verifies the general vouchers, and the Treasury issues the final payment. This multi-layered system was built for security, but the sheer volume of steps provided enough distance for a mastermind to hide their tracks. Chief Accountant Rolando Mangubat and a core group of officials met off-site to find a way around these checkpoints. They bypassed the authorization process by typing counterfeit LAAs on their days off. They ignored official sequence numbers and completely cut the finance officer out of the loop. This animation illustrates how they erased the paper trail. By using negative journal entries, the team canceled out the illegal withdrawals on the regional trial balances, making the final numbers appear as zero. They categorized the stolen money as unliquidated obligations, payments for old debts. This move dropped the missing millions into a specific accounting folder, hiding it from the current year's audit stream. That trigger was pulled at the district level by engineers like Simon Fernan Jr. and Expedito Torrevillas. These engineers provided the necessary documentation. By signing tally sheets and delivery receipts for premium asphalt, they certified that the materials had physically arrived at the project sites, prompting the release of the Treasury checks. On paper, the Cebu First Highway Engineering District was executing millions of pesos in high-quality road improvements. Local residents and officials saw a different reality. Testimony from barangay captains revealed that the roads were never paved with asphalt. They were simply patched with a cheap limestone known as inapok. The fraud thrived on a geographic disconnect. While auditors in Manila reviewed perfectly balanced records, citizens in Cebu navigated crumbling dirt roads. By 1977, the illegal disbursements in the Cebu First District reached 12.3 million pesos. The sheer volume of the theft eventually caused the system to fail. A joint task force from the NBI and the Commission on Audit stepped in to physically inspect the roadwork against the district's records. Their investigation proved that the massive funds dispersed for current year projects had gone toward deliveries that never happened and roads that were never built. No forged accounting loop, regardless of how balanced it appears in a ledger, can survive a physical audit of the real world. In court, the district engineers argued they were innocent cogs following orders. They claimed they had no knowledge of the masterminds at the regional office. The Supreme Court rejected this defense, using the wheel conspiracy theory shown in this mind map. The court ruled that even if the engineers never met the masterminds at the hub, their forged signatures were the indispensable spokes that kept the wheel of fraud turning. The Cebu Highway Scam demonstrates that bureaucratic red tape can be a vulnerability. Ultimately, a system of checks and balances is only as strong as the individuals holding the pens.
This video examines the Cebu Highway Scam, an 86 million peso fraud case brought before the Supreme Court of the Philippines, illustrating a complex web of corruption within public works. The scale of the fraud involved 119 criminal cases against 36 officials and employees. In reality, maintenance work was minimal, often just spreading crushed limestone on potholes. This investigation uncovers the architecture of the scam, from the fraudulent schemes and legal frameworks involved to the key personalities and the evidence gathered. At the nucleus of the conspiracy was a core group that exploited accounting loopholes in the Ministry of Public Highways, selling fake project allocations to contractors. To understand how the system was hijacked, we must first look at the intended 5-step control process for highway maintenance funding, which was meant to ensure legitimacy. The conspirators bypassed these controls through 4 specific tactics: fabricating allocations, splitting vouchers to avoid oversight, misdirecting ledger charges, and using negative entries to cover the trail. District engineers served as essential enablers. While they didn't manage the ledgers, their signatures on fake tally sheets and inspection reports were critical to authorizing the fraudulent payments. The paper trail claimed high-grade materials were delivered, but local testimonies confirmed that these major repairs never occurred. The conclusion was clear: the high-grade materials never existed. The accused faced charges of estafa through falsification. These 2 grave felonies were linked as a complex crime, where the act of falsifying documents was the necessary means to commit the fraud. The defense argued a lack of knowledge, but the court applied mathematical logic. If actual materials had been delivered, the cost would have left no profit for 36 conspirators to share. The court utilized the, quote, wheel conspiracy doctrine, which holds that if a hub organization facilitates separate deals with various spokes, those spokes are part of a single, larger conspiracy. Ultimately, the Supreme Court affirmed the convictions. It ruled that every action performed was an essential overt act in the fraud, establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer and untangle what is easily one of the most infamous, not to mention ingenious, financial heists in Philippine history. We're looking at a case from back in 1977 that honestly has practically zero parallels in the country's criminal annals. And that's largely due to its sheer magnitude, the sprawling network of people involved, and the incredible, almost dizzying complexity of the scheme they used to defraud the government.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The 86 million peso heist. 2. Hacking the bureaucracy. 3. The ghost deliveries. 4. The unraveling. And finally, 5. The wheel conspiracy.
Section 1. The 86 million peso heist. Let's start by setting the stage for this massive defalcation of public funds over at the Cebu First Highway Engineering District. 86 million pesos. That is a staggering number, representing the exact amount stolen from the government. And keep in mind, this was 1977. If you adjust that for today's inflation, the figure is absolutely astronomical. But you know what makes this so captivating? There were no ski masks, no getaway cars. Nobody robbed a bank with a weapon. This fortune was siphoned entirely through sheer, paper-based bureaucratic manipulation by the very people entrusted with guarding the public purse.
You know how every great heist movie starts with a smoky backroom meeting? Well, this real-life scam was honestly no different. Sometime in February 1977, a secret meeting took place at the Town and Country restaurant in Cebu City. The mastermind of this whole thing, Chief Accountant Rolando Mangubat, sat down with a few key colleagues. Mangubat had found a loophole, a really clever way to drain government money using fake documents, and he basically enticed his colleagues into an audacious plan to actually pull it off.
Because this wasn't just your run-of-the-mill smash and grab. The sheer scale of the operation is wild. You've got highly sophisticated fraudulent accounting schemes happening on one side, massive document falsification on another, and a vast interconnected network of key personalities tying it all together. It required a level of coordination that is, frankly, mind-boggling.
Section 2. Hacking the bureaucracy.
So how do a bunch of unscrupulous insiders actually manage to steal 86 million pesos right under the government's nose? Normally, moving government funding follows this very strict, multi-step procedure to ensure public funds are tracked. A request is made, funds are earmarked, bidding happens, purchase orders go out, deliveries are made and inspected, and only then is a general voucher prepared to release a check to the contractor. It's an elaborate red tape obstacle course designed specifically as a system of controls. But here's where the hack comes in. In the hands of an insider steeped in government accounting, that rigid system proved incredibly vulnerable. The conspirators started by fabricating unnumbered letters of advice of allotment, or LAAs, which basically functioned as fake funding authorizations. But to avoid setting off alarm bells, they deliberately split the payment vouchers so that each individual one was just under 50,000 pesos. Why? Because that perfectly bypassed the need for approval from the regional auditor. To make the accounting ledgers balance, they'd charge these fake disbursements to unliquidated obligations from previous years, and then use negative journal entries to magically conceal the illegal checks from the monthly trial balances. I mean, it was accounting gymnastics at its absolute finest.
Section 3. The ghost deliveries.
Now, how does this elaborate paper hack actually translate to the physical highways of Cebu? Because remember, to get a check cut, you have to prove that a contractor actually delivered something for a public works project. Well, there was a rather stark contrast between the falsified documents and physical reality. On paper, millions upon millions of pesos were supposedly spent on high-grade, bituminous asphalt to repair national highways. But out in the real world, no asphalt whatsoever. The dangerous reality on the ground was that local road workers, called camineros, were just filling highway potholes with anapog, which is a cheap, locally sourced crushed limestone.
And the prosecution during the trial proved this by bringing in the people who actually drove those roads every single day. Testimonies from multiple local leaders, like Barangay Captain Filomeno Orbiso, confirmed that the expensive asphalt was quite simply never delivered. Residents from various towns testified that the roads remained completely unpaved or incredibly rough, with potholes mysteriously appearing right when these supposed multi-million peso improvements were happening. It confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that these were 100% ghost deliveries.
Now, the vital link in this whole chain of fraud rested on the physical inspections. For a ghost delivery to look real on paper, someone had to sign off saying they physically saw and inspected the materials. That's where engineers like Simon Fernan Jr. and Expedito Torrevillas come in. They provided those vital signatures on fake tally sheets and inspection reports, falsely certifying non-existent deliveries. Fernan Jr. signed off on ghost deliveries, enabling 146,000 pesos in fraud, while Torrevillas signed off on documents enabling over 337,000 pesos. Without those signatures, the fake vouchers couldn't be processed, and the checks literally could not be issued.
Section 4. The unraveling.
As with any massive heist, the perfect crime doesn't exist, right? Eventually, the sheer audacious scale of the operation caused the whole scheme to fall apart. The unraveling was sparked by a pretty classic mix of sloppy paperwork and human greed. First, sharp-eyed Commission on Audit investigators noticed that the fake LAAs lacked proper sequential numbering and, crucially, were missing the authentic signature of the regional finance officer. But beyond the paper trail, there was the sheer arrogance of the perpetrators. You had government clerks living on meager government salaries suddenly spending lavishly. We're talking buying 2 cars at a time. That immediately drew the attention of the National Bureau of Investigation, and a special task force was formed to blow the case wide open.
This unraveling led to a massive 119 criminal cases being filed. The specific charge? A complex crime known as Estafa through falsification of public documents. To put it simply, this means defrauding the government by public officers who actively take advantage of their official positions to intentionally make untruthful statements of fact on official records. This was the exact legal hammer brought down on the 36 individuals who facilitated this massive drain on the public purse.
Section 5. The Wheel Conspiracy.
This brings us to the courtroom showdown and a truly fascinating legal precedent. When you have 36 disparate people, accountants, budget examiners, civil engineers, independent material suppliers, how on earth do you prove they were all in on it together? Well, the Supreme Court utilized a specific legal theory known as the wheel conspiracy. Because let's face it, secrecy and concealment are essential to fraud. You rarely catch conspirators signing a master contract outlining their evil plan. So the wheel conspiracy theory links these disparate actors together. Think of an actual bicycle wheel. You have a single person or group acting as the hub right in the center, and they deal individually with two or more other persons or groups which act as the outward spokes.
Applying that to the Cebu Highway Scam, the mastermind accountants, Mangubat, Pregado, Saisan, and Cruz, acted as that central hub. They entirely controlled the flow of fake documents and the accounting cover-ups. Meanwhile, the civil engineers like Fernan Jr. and Torrevillas, who signed those fake tally sheets, alongside the material suppliers who received the fraudulent checks, functioned as the essential spokes. Even if a specific engineer didn't know a specific material supplier directly, they were all connected to that central hub, and their actions kept the wheel of fraud spinning.
Ultimately, the Supreme Court affirmed the convictions with an incredibly powerful ruling. They stated that because each person performed their assigned task with martinet-like precision and accuracy to attain a common objective, which was stealing public funds, they were all equally liable. As the court famously affirmed, the act of one is the act of all. The engineers tried to argue, hey, we didn't know about the grand scheme, we just signed some routine papers, but the court wasn't having it. They ruled that without their signatures on those fake tally sheets, the entire chain would have broken. Their intentional participation in their specific spoke was absolutely indispensable to the wheel as a whole.
This whole analysis of the 1977 scam leaves us with a pretty lingering, provocative question. We've obviously moved from paper ledgers and manual stamps to digital systems, blockchain, and automated auditing algorithms, but human greed and systemic loopholes, those tend to persist. So has today's digital bureaucracy truly eliminated these vulnerabilities, or has the wheel of fraud simply evolved into something much more high-tech? It's a vital question to consider as we continually try to design systems meant to protect the public trust.
So imagine you're living in Cebu back in 1977.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And you hear that the Philippine government just dropped an absolute fortune, like 3.8 million pesos, on maintaining the roads right in your district, the first engineering district of Cebu.
Which, I mean, in the late 70s, 3.8 million pesos is a massive, massive budget for just one rural district.
Exactly. It's a staggering amount of money. And on paper, if you look at the records, the government is buying mountains of this high-grade bituminous asphalt. They're supposedly bringing in all this imported, processed gravel.
Really top-tier infrastructure investment, supposedly.
Supposedly. Because if you actually live there, right, if you drove your car or just walked down those provincial highways, you wouldn't see a single steamroller.
No paving crews either, I bet.
Not one. Nothing. Instead, what you would actually see are these local laborers out there filling giant craters in the road with cheap limestone.
Oh.
Yeah, literally just scooping it directly out of the dirt on the side of the road with shovels and wheelbarrows. And, you know, today, we are looking at where the rest of that 3.8 million pesos actually went.
And this is such a fascinating topic because we are really looking at an absolute masterclass in bureaucratic subversion here.
Yeah.
It's a massive theft, but it's executed well. It's not done with physical force or, you know, a daring bank heist.
Right. No ski masks.
Exactly. No ski mask. It's done with this deep, like almost intimate and ultimately weaponized understanding of administrative procedure. It is fundamentally a story about how the very systems designed to protect your tax dollars can basically be inverted to siphon them away.
I am so eager to unpack this with you because for this deep dive, we have an incredible stack of sources. We are working off a massive 119-count Supreme Court of the Philippines decision.
It's a huge document.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's GR now 145927, which was decided on August 24, 2007. And we're also pulling insights from a really detailed mind map and an audio analysis of the case.
Right.
It chronicles the whole thing, what became known as the Cebu Highway Scam of 1977. But I think it's important to say that our mission for this deep dive, it isn't just to treat this like a true crime whodunit.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the who is already heavily documented in the court records. It's public knowledge.
Yeah.
Our primary objective today is really to dissect the how.
The mechanics of it.
Exactly. Like, how do systemic loopholes in government accounting allow this highly coordinated, what they call a wheel conspiracy? How does that operate right under the noses of internal auditors?
Yeah.
And crucially, we need to understand how two civil engineers who were basically at the very bottom of the bureaucratic ladder,
Simon Fernan Jr. and Expedito Expedito Torrevillas.
Right, those two. How did they end up fighting their criminal convictions all the way to the highest tribunal in the land?
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you are listening to this right now and you're thinking, well, a 1970s administrative dispute over road gravel sounds a little bit dry.
Which is a fair initial thought.
It is. But I need you to hold that thought, because anyone who has ever been incredibly frustrated by corporate red tape.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Or if you've ever had to fill out endless forms in triplicate or navigate this rigid, agonizing chain of command just to get a basic project approved at work, if you've lived that, you are going to find the mechanics of this fraud absolutely fascinating.
It really is the ultimate cautionary tale, because it shows what happens when that exact red tape you're talking about is reverse engineered.
Yeah.
I mean, the fraudsters in this case, they didn't break the system in a conventional sense. They didn't, smash the glass or hack a mainframe.
Yeah.
They used the system. They took the very safeguards that were meant to prevent theft and they turned them into the actual engine of the theft itself.
That is just wild to me. But before we get into the heist itself, we really need to understand the vault they were breaking into.
That's a good analogy.
And this vault wasn't made of steel. It was constructed out of this incredibly complex, multi-layered administrative procedure. So let's look at the legitimate, totally legal process for how the Ministry of Public Highways, the MPH, funded its projects back in '77.
Right. And it was this deliberately elaborate labyrinth. I mean, it was designed specifically to decentralize the spending authority, but at the same time, trying to maintain a centralized control over the actual cash.
Okay, so how did it work ideally?
Well, if we look at the flow of funds, this is outlined in the court's Exhibit B chart, we can see the theoretical control devices. It all starts at the very top, in Manila, with the Ministry of Budget.
Okay, the top of the pyramid.
Exactly. So based on the appropriation laws passed by the government, the Ministry of Budget has to release funds to the various agencies. But they don't just hand over a briefcase of cash. They execute this release using two very distinct conceptual instruments.
And let's break those two instruments down carefully, because the entire fraud basically operates in the gap between them.
Right. It absolutely does. So the first instrument is called the Advice of Allotment. You'll hear it referred to as the AA.
The AA, got it.
This document grants the authority to incur an obligation. It's essentially just a budget line item.
So the Advice of Allotment, the AA, is basically the government saying, you are authorized to make a plan to spend this money. Like, we have allocated 10 million pesos for infrastructure in your specific region.
Right.
But it's literally just permission to make a plan. You can't spend it yet.
Exactly. Being allowed to incur an obligation is not at all the same thing as actually having the liquid cash sitting in the bank to pay the bills that come from that obligation.
Right. That makes sense.
And that's where the second instrument comes in. This is the cash disbursement ceiling, or the CDC.
The CDC.
Yeah, the CDC is the actual physical authority to pay. It signifies that, yes, the cash is currently sitting in the Treasury, and it's ready to be drawn upon to settle the debts you made under the AA.
Okay, so I'm thinking about this like a corporate budget or even my own household finances.
Yeah.
The AA and all the documents that flow from it, that's all about authorization. It's the budget.
Right.
But the CDC and its downstream documents, that's about the actual cash limit. It's the physical checking account.
Precisely. You've got the budget versus the checking account. And this dual system, it cascades all the way down the hierarchy.
How many layers are we talking?
A lot. So the Ministry of Budget issues the mother AA and the mother CDC to the central office of the MPH in Manila.
Okay.
Then the central office takes those mother documents and fragments them for each region across the country. So they create a sub-advice of allotment, the SAA, and an advice of cash disbursement ceiling, the ACDC.
Oh boy. The alphabet soup is real.
It really is. So the SAA and the ACDC get dispatched to the regional office. And for our case, that is MPH Region 7th, which is located in Cebu.
Okay, but even now at the regional office, we still haven't reached the local guys.
Right.
The people who actually, pour the concrete and fix the roads.
No, we haven't. There's another step. Upon receiving that SAA and the ACDC, the REBI's budget officer prepares what's called the Letters of Advice of Allotment. The LAs.
The LAs, okay, I know those are going to be important.
Very important. These LAs are then physically forwarded, like sent in the mail or carried, to the various local districts within the region. So places like the Cebu First Highway Engineering District.
Right.
And the foundational rule, the absolute bedrock of this entire bureaucracy is this. Only upon the physical receipt of that LAA is the local district office legally authorized to start spending.
So they are totally frozen until that paper arrives.
Completely. They cannot solicit bids. They cannot order a single bag of cement. They cannot incur a single peso of debt until that LA is physically sitting in their filing cabinet.
Okay. Wow. So that is just the macro level funding cascade, getting the permission down the chain.
Yep.
But what actually happens when a local district finally has that LAA in their filing cabinet and they need to, I don't know, fix a washed out bridge?
Well, that initiates a localized procurement process that is honestly just as heavily layered as the funding process.
Of course that is.
Right. So first, the senior civil engineer in the district office has to draft a requisition for supplies and equipment, the RSE.
Okay.
Then the district engineer has to approve it. Then the chief accountant has to step in and certify that funds are actually available.
Meaning they physically verify that they have a valid LAA to cover it.
Exactly. They check the file. And then once that's certified, this requisition goes all the way back up chain to the regional director for final approval.
So there's this constant vertical movement. The local office asks for permission, the regional office grants it, and it comes back down to the local level.
Yes, a lot of back and forth. So once the regional director approves that requisition, it returns to the local district. Then the chief accountant prepares a request for obligation of allotment, an ROA.
And what does that do?
It's a crucial accounting step. It basically freezes those specific funds. It earmarks a portion of the money from the LAA specifically for this bridge repair, so the district can't accidentally spend that exact same money twice.
Okay, that's smart. So now the funds are frozen and secured. Can they finally buy the gravel?
Finally, yes. Based on that ROA, the district office conducts a public bidding, they award the contract to the lowest bidder, and they issue a purchase order.
Nice.
Then the private contractor supposedly delivers the materials to the job site. And this is where it's really specific. The district office personnel, specifically the civil engineers, have to physically inspect the delivery.
Right. Someone has to make sure they got what they paid for.
Exactly. So they inspect it, and then they prepare delivery receipts and what are called tally sheets. These tally sheets are legally binding documents. By signing them, the engineer is certifying the exact quantity and the exact quality of the materials that were dropped off.
I really want us to bookmark those tally sheets because from looking at the sources, those specific pieces of paper are going to become the absolute focal point of this entire Supreme Court case.
They absolutely are the linchpin, because if the inspection is passed and those tally sheets get signed by the engineers, then the district office can prepare a general voucher.
And the voucher is just the formal request to get the contractor paid.
Right. It goes through a final check, and finally, a check in the form of a Treasury Check Account for Agency, or TCAA, is drawn up by the disbursing officer and physically handed over to the contractor.
Okay, I have to stop you here. I have to offer some genuine pushback on this.
Sure, go ahead.
Because we just walked through a system that involves, like, the Ministry of Budget, the central office, the regional office, and the local district. We talked about AAs, CDCs, LAAs, ROAs, public bidding, physical site inspections by licensed civil engineers, and multiple voucher approvals.
There's a lot of layers.
It's an insane amount of layers. If there are this many layers of government, this many required signatures, and this much strict compartmentalization of duties, how on earth do you successfully siphon millions of pesos?
It seems impossible.
It does. I mean, why wouldn't a fraudster just bypass all of this headache? Why not just, steal a blank treasury checkbook, forge a signature, walk into a bank, and take the cash without bothering to forge a dozen different internal district documents?
That question right there gets to the central genius and, frankly, the central vulnerability of this entire scam.
Oh, so?
Because a simple forged check might get you cash today. But the moment the Bureau of Treasury sits down to reconcile its canceled checks with the ministry's stated balances, the discrepancy is immediately obvious.
Oh, right. Because the math won't add up.
Exactly. The alarm bells would ring across Manila, and the investigation would start within weeks. The architects of the scam, they didn't want to just rob the bank once and go on the run.
Yeah.
They wanted to put the bank on a permanent, invisible payroll.
Oh, wow. So the exhaustive forgery of all that internal paperwork, the fake LAAs, the fake tally sheets, it wasn't actually designed to trick the bank at all. It was designed to trick the internal auditors.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But for that to actually work, They needed to exploit a massive systemic blind spot between the ministry and the financial institutions themselves.
A blind spot.
Yeah. You see, while all this incredibly elaborate internal accounting was happening inside the Ministry of Public Highways, the banks that were actually cashing the checks, the Philippine National Bank, or PNB, and the Bureau of Treasury, they were operating in a total information vacuum.
What do you mean by an information vacuum? Like they didn't know what was going on?
Basically, yes. The local PNB branch in Cebu and the Bureau of Treasury, they were never furnished with copies of the mother CDC.
Wait, really?
Never. They never saw the original cash disbursement ceiling that came down from Manila. Furthermore, the local PNB branch didn't even receive independent advice from their own head office about what the regional budget limits actually were.
Are you serious? So the entity, the actual bank that is handing over the physical cash over the counter, had absolutely no visibility into the legal limits of the government's checking account.
None whatsoever. Because it wasn't a standard checking account. There were no actual deposits of physical money made into a specific PNB account from which withdrawals could just be, mathematically subtracted until it hit zero.
Okay, then how did the bank know when to stop paying?
That's the thing. It was a treasury warrant system. The bank only ever saw the CDCs that were presented to them by the government officials themselves.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They had absolutely no independent mechanism to verify if the legal limit had been exceeded. So if an official walked in and presented a treasury check that looked official, drawn against the CDC that looked valid, the bank just honored it.
That is a staggering vulnerability. I mean, the internal checks and balances we talked about, they only function if the internal auditors catch a discrepancy. But the final failsafe, the bank itself, is flying completely blind. They're just blindly trusting the paper in front of them.
Exactly. And the perpetrators realized something brilliant. They realized that if you could manufacture the paperwork within the ministry so that it looked completely pristine to the internal auditors, the bank would just keep handing over the cash endlessly.
Because the system wouldn't stop them, because the system didn't even know they were stealing.
Right.
The paper trail looked perfect.
Wow. So this totally moves us from theoretical vulnerabilities into a very real, very lucrative criminal enterprise.
It does.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because in February of 1977, a group gathered at the Town and Country restaurant in Cebu City. And this wasn't, a meeting of cartel bosses or armed robbers with blueprints.
Oh, far from it.
This was a meeting of mid-level bureaucrats.
Right. And this specific group, they became the absolute nucleus of the entire conspiracy. Yeah. In the court records, they're referred to as the hub.
Yes. And it consisted of 4 key individuals, all from the Ministry of Public Highways, Region 7th. You had Rolando Mangubat, who was the chief accountant. You had Delia Preguido, an accountant the 3rd. You had Jose San, a budget examiner. And you had Edgardo Cruz, a clerk the 2nd.
It is deeply unsettling, honestly, that the people who are most capable of dismantling a secure system are the exact ones who are hired to maintain it.
It's the classic insider threat.
Yeah. I mean, Mangubat, as the chief accountant, he understood the flow of that paper better than literally anyone else in the region. But he couldn't execute the fraud all by himself, right? The separation of duties we talked about required accomplices.
Exactly. He needed an assembly line. He couldn't type the forms, sign the forms, and approve the forms alone.
So what was the plan they hatched at that restaurant?
Mangubat basically designed a 3-pronged attack to systematically bypass all the safeguards. The first maneuver was designed specifically to avoid high-level scrutiny. It's a classic tactic known as voucher splitting.
Okay, voucher splitting. So if they wanted to steal, say, 1 million pesos, they couldn't just write a single voucher for 1 million pesos.
Exactly. At that time, government regulations clearly stipulated that any general voucher for an amount of 50,000 pesos or more automatically triggered a mandatory review. It had to be approved by the regional auditor, which meant bringing in an independent set of eyes, someone outside the hub.
Which they obviously didn't want.
Right. So Mangubat's solution was incredibly elegant in its simplicity. Just never, ever issue a voucher for 50,000 pesos.
They fragmented the billing.
Yes.
So if you have this massive ghost project that costs hundreds of thousands, you just submit dozens of smaller invoices.
Yeah, chop it up.
It's the exact same mechanism that money launderers use today, right? When they structure their bank deposits to avoid federal reporting limits, like staying under $10,000.
It's the exact same principle. It keeps the transaction entirely invisible to the higher-ups. The regional auditor never even saw a thing because none of the vouchers crossed their desk.
That's so simple, but so effective.
But keeping the vouchers small is really only step 1. because they still needed the foundational document that authorizes the spending in the first place.
Right, the LAA, the Letter of Advice of Allotment.
Yes. And obviously, the central office in Manila wasn't just going to magically send them extra budget approvals for ghost projects.
So they had to create them.
They did. And this is exactly where the clerk and the budget examiner come in.
Edgardo Cruz and Jose Cecin.
Yes. Their role in the hub was the physical manufacture and the distribution of this entire shadow budget. They literally agreed to help Mangubat by typing up fake LAAs.
Just sitting there typing them out.
Yeah. The court records actually note that they would do this on Saturdays.
Wow.
They'd sit in the empty government offices on the weekends, just pounding out these official-looking documents on typewriters, documents that authorized the release of millions and millions of pesos.
Just manufacturing government authority out of thin air on a Saturday afternoon. But okay, typing a fake document doesn't actually get you cash in your pocket.
Yeah.
They had to somehow inject these fake LAAs into the real economy to get paid.
And that made Cruz and Cezanne essentially the salesmen of the operation.
Salesmen.
Yeah. They took these freshly typed, completely fictitious LAAs, and they went out and negotiated them with private contractors.
Okay.
The proposition they offered was very simple. The contractors would use these fake LAAs to bill the government for infrastructure projects that they would supposedly do. And in exchange for providing this, this license to steal, Cruz and Cezanne demanded a cut.
A kickback.
A huge one. They demanded a 26% cut of the gross amount of every single fake LAA they handed over.
Okay, wait. We really need to do the math on that. Because that 26% kickback is the structural key to why this whole thing had to be a ghost project.
Yes. Let's look at the economics of it.
Because if I am a legitimate contractor, right, and I win a real government bid to build a road, I have to buy actual asphalt, I have to buy gravel, I have to rent heavy machinery, and I have to pay my laborers their daily wage.
All real overhead costs.
Right. My profit margin on a public works project might be, what, 10%? Maybe 15%? If I'm extremely lucky and efficient.
That sounds about right.
So if the hub is demanding 26% right off the top just for handing me the paperwork, I mathematically cannot build the road. There isn't enough money left over to even buy the materials, let alone make a profit.
You've hit on the vital economic reality of this entire conspiracy. The sheer size of the kickback required by the hub practically guaranteed that the contractors could not perform the work.
They literally couldn't afford, to be honest.
Exactly. The only way the contractor makes any money at all after paying a 26% bribe is if their overhead for the project is zero.
Right.
And the only way your overhead on a major road construction project is zero is if you deliver absolutely nothing.
Wow. So the extortion demands of the bureaucracy basically mandated the complete fabrication of the physical project.
It baked the ghost deliveries right into the business model.
That is wild. But okay, even with the contractors playing along, and even with the vouchers successfully kept under 50,000 pesos to avoid the auditor, there is still a glaring problem here.
The central ledgers.
Yes. Eventually, at the end of the month or the end of the year, the central office in Manila is going to look at the regional ledgers. And they are going to see that Region 7th is spending twice as much money as it was officially allocated. The accounting wouldn't balance. It would be a huge red flag.
And this is where the third, and I would argue the most sophisticated prong of the attack was deployed. This was the domain of Delia Priagito, the accountant the third.
Okay.
Her specific job in the hub was to erase the tracks. She controlled the general ledger, the journal vouchers, and the general journal.
And I want to elevate this beyond just a simple analogy of, hiding a shopping spree on a joint bank statement so your spouse doesn't see it. Because what Prieto was doing was incredibly dangerous from a systems perspective. How exactly did she manipulate the accounting codes to hide millions of pesos?
It was incredibly clever. When a disbursement was made on one of those fake LAAs, Prieto knew she could not charge it to the current year's operating budget.
Because that would show an overdraw immediately.
Right. The 1977 budget would instantly flash red as overdrawn, and the alarms would sound in Manila that very same day.
So where did she hide the expense?
Instead of the current budget, she charged these fraudulent disbursements to a very specific ledger code, account 881-400.
Account 881-400.
Yes. In the government accounting parlance of 1977, this was the specific account designated for unliquidated obligations from prior years.
Okay, let's define that for a second. Unliquidated obligations are supposed to be legitimate pre-existing debts, right? Like, if the government contracted a company to build a bridge in 1976, but the work wasn't finished and they didn't get invoiced until 1977, the government still legally owes that money. It was budgeted in 76, but it remains unliquidated.
That's a legitimate use of the account.
So Prieto is taking these entirely fake 1977 disbursements, and she's billing them against supposed 1976 debts.
Exactly. She is literally creating ghost debt from the past to justify ghost spending in the present. She debited the fake payments to these supposed prior year obligations, even though those obligations were entirely fabricated and had never actually been certified at the end of the previous fiscal year.
Wow.
And then she credited the checking account with the Bureau of Treasury, account 870790.
But wait, the systemic danger there is that the general fund isn't infinite?
No, it's not.
If you constantly debit an unliquidated obligations account with millions in fake charges, you're just creating this rolling, compounding deficit. It's a ticking time bomb. Because eventually, the macro-level cash balances at the Bureau of Treasury will not match the aggregated trial balances of the regions. The money will just be missing.
Priagito knew this. She was an accountant. She knew exactly how a ledger works. She knew that eventually the total amount of checks they issued would mathematically exceed the authorized cash disbursement ceiling, and the monthly trial balances sent to Manila would expose the massive deficit.
So how did she defuse the time bomb?
Temporarily, she diffused it by engaging in a continuous monthly cycle of falsification. Every single month, before the reports went to Manila, she prepared adjustment journal vouchers. She made what accountants call negative entry.
Negative entry.
Yeah. She would basically take up a negative debit to the unliquidated obligations account and a negative credit to the Treasury checking account.
So she is systematically canceling out the previous entries that she used to record the disbursements on the fake LAAs in the first place.
Yes. She's wiping them off the visible monthly report. When the affected accounts were summarized in the monthly trial balance that was mailed to the central office in Manila, the report looked absolutely pristine.
Incredible.
The negative entries artificially balanced the ledger. On paper, there was no irregularity at all. The books balanced perfectly, while in reality, millions of pesos in checks were flying out the door and being cashed over the counter at the PNB.
It is terrifyingly brilliant. Manguet's group created a completely self-contained alternate reality within the ledgers.
They really did.
But, manipulating accounting codes in an air-conditioned office in Cebu City is really only half the crime.
Right, there's the ground game.
Exactly. To actually get those checks cut, to actually trick the bank into handing over the physical cash, you need to generate the physical ground-level paperwork to justify those checks. The accounting fiction requires a physical fiction to support it.
The paperwork has to exist.
And that brings us out of the regional office and down into the local districts, specifically the Cebu First Highway Engineering District.
This is the operational theater where we finally meet the petitioners in our Supreme Court case, Simon Fernan Jr. and Expedito Torrevillas.
Right.
They were civil engineers assigned to that local district. If the hub in the regional office was the brain of the conspiracy, the civil engineers and the local contractors were the hands.
And to really comprehend what Fernan and Torrevillas were involved in, we have to look at the staggering scale of the fraud in just their one single district.
The numbers are wild.
According to the court records, for the entire year of 1977, the Cebu First Highway Engineering District received 34 legitimate, genuine LAAs. These represented their actual legal budget for the year, and it totaled approximately 4.7 million pesos.
Okay, so that 4.7 million was what they were genuinely authorized to spend to maintain all the roads, bridges, and infrastructure in their entire jurisdiction for that whole year.
Right. But operating entirely in parallel to that, the district also received 84 fake LAAs. 84. And these fake LAAs authorized an additional 4.6 million pesos in spending. So you have a shadow budget that is almost identical in size to the real budget.
It basically doubled their budget overnight.
Yes. And because of unrecorded checks and further ledger manipulations, the total illegal disbursements in that single district eventually ballooned to over 12.3 million pesos.
It's just an astronomical sum of money to vanish, especially in 1977.
Really is.
And I think the audacity of the crime is most apparent when you contrast the pristine paperwork generated by the district with the harsh physical reality of the roads themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the fake LAAs and the resulting general vouchers, they claim that an additional 3.8 million pesos have been spent specifically on the maintenance of national roads and bridges in that district during that specific year.
And 3.8 million pesos buys an incredible amount of infrastructure. It buys fleets of heavy machinery, it buys tons of structural steel, and it buys miles and miles of freshly laid pavement.
On paper, the Cebu First District was experiencing like an unprecedented infrastructure boom.
A golden age of roads. But on the pavement, out in the real world, the reality was incredibly bleak. And the disconnect between the ledger and the landscape, that is exactly where Fernan Jr. and Torrevillas become central figures.
Right, because as civil engineers, their specific assigned role in the bureaucracy was to inspect the deliveries and sign those tally sheets and delivery receipts we talked about earlier.
Right.
Going back to the process, when a contractor allegedly delivers materials to a job site, a government representative must be physically present to verify it.
They can't just take the contractor's word for it.
Exactly. They have to count the volume, they have to inspect the quality, and they have to sign a binding legal document stating, I certify that this specific quantity of this specific material was delivered to this specific kilometer marker on this exact date.
That tally sheet is the proof.
It is the indispensable proof of delivery. Without it, the payment voucher mathematically cannot be generated.
And according to the findings that were affirmed by the Supreme Court, Simon Fernan Jr. admitted to signing tally sheets that pertain to completely non-existent deliveries totaling over 146,000 pesos.
A huge amount.
And his colleague, Expedito Torrevillas, he admitted to signing tally sheets and inspection reports for an even greater amount, over 337,000 pesos.
And you have to understand, their signatures were the final mechanism that unlocked the vault. Once those tally sheets were signed by licensed civil engineers, they were attached to the fake LAAs and the fake general vouchers, creating this seemingly bulletproof paper trail.
Right.
The internal auditors would see a signed inspection report from a licensed engineer, they'd approve the voucher, and the treasury checks would be cut and just handed directly to the contractors.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second, because this touches on the core defense strategy these engineers attempted in court.
Okay, go for it.
How does the court prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that these were entirely ghost deliveries? I mean, is it possible that the contractors actually did deliver materials, but they were just of incredibly poor quality?
That's a common defense.
Or perhaps the engineers were simply negligent. Maybe they were just lazy. Maybe they sat in the air conditioning of their trucks and just signed off on deliveries without looking closely. How do you prove that absolutely nothing of value was delivered?
That is the exact burden of proof the prosecution had to meet.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, they didn't rely solely on forensic accountants to meet it.
Yeah.
No, they relied on the devastating, granular testimonies of the local barangay captains.
Wow.
These are the elected leaders of the rural villages and towns where these massive road repairs supposedly took place. The state went directly to the people who were driving over those exact roads every single day.
And reading through these testimonies in the court decision, it is just remarkable. It totally grounds the sterile, accounting fraud in this gritty physical reality. Let's explore some of these specific testimonies, because the prosecution used them to completely dismantle the idea of near negligence.
Right. For example, the state called Macario Lima, who is the barangay captain of Antipolo and Medellin, Cebu, and they also called Filomeno Orbiso, the barangay captain of Kawit.
Okay.
They both testified under oath regarding the actual condition of the national highway running through their jurisdictions during 1977.
And what did they say?
Well, the official tally sheets claimed massive, continuous deliveries of high-grade construction materials to those exact locations. But Lima and Orbiso testified that the roads remained rough, dirt tracks riddled with potholes all year.
Wow.
They stated unequivocally that no major repairs, and certainly no massive deliveries of materials, had occurred at all.
Then there is the testimony of Timoteo Ancajas, the barangay captain of Paypay and Dan Bentengan. The government documentation claims significant infrastructure investment in his specific area. Yet, Ancajas testified that the only maintenance he witnessed the entire year was a small crew of Caminero's local road workers filling potholes with a material called anapog.
And anapog is a crucial, incredibly damning detail in this case.
What is it?
It is a local Cebuano term for crushed limestone.
Okay.
It is an exceedingly cheap, low-grade, readily available material. It's often just dug directly out of the ground in the surrounding areas. It is basically the absolute antithesis of the expensive, highly processed construction materials that the government was supposedly purchasing on those tally sheets.
Ancajas even noted in his testimony that it took the Camineros 3 whole months from the time the limestone was dumped on the side of the road to actually start shoveling it into the potholes.
3 months?
And the contrast gets even sharper. Remedios Feliciano, the Bernique captain of Luke, and Alberto Bronzuela, a resident of San Jose, Catmon, they testified that they literally watched road workers gather anapog directly from the shoulder of the road to fill the holes.
They were quite literally shoveling the dirt from the side of the highway into the center of the highway while the government was being billed millions.
And we can contrast that physical reality directly with the paperwork Fernan and Torrevillas signed. The government was not being billed for anapog.
Not at all.
The tally sheets signed by Torrevillas specifically certified the delivery of item 310. And in civil engineering standards, item 310 is high-grade bituminous asphalt.
Very expensive.
Very. And Fernan Jr. signed tally sheets certifying the delivery of item 108, which is highly processed graded sand and gravel. So on paper, the district is paying the province in premium asphalt. But in reality, the locals are watching men with shovels move roadside limestone.
The Supreme Court found this contrast undeniable and, frankly, insurmountable for the defense. I mean, you have a paper trail claiming 3.8 million pesos in specific high-grade improvements, and you have the citizens living on those very roads testifying that they remained dirt tracks patched with rocks.
Right.
The court concluded that the testimonies of these barangay captains, who, by the way, had absolutely no motive to perjure themselves, proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the deliveries certified by the engineers were entirely fictitious.
It wasn't just them being lazy inspectors.
No, it wasn't negligence. It was active fabrication. The government received nothing.
The illusion was perfect on paper, but it just couldn't survive contact with reality. And interestingly, the collapse of this whole conspiracy, it wasn't triggered by some brilliant audit or a sudden realization by Manila that account 881-400 was a ticking time bomb.
No, it rarely is.
It was triggered by basic human hubris.
Yep.
The National Bureau of Investigation, the NBI, received a tip because some of the lower-level employees who were receiving these massive payouts began spending with reckless abandon.
Always a bad idea.
Right. In 1977, on a clerk's meager government salary, you do not go out and buy 2 cars simultaneously.
It's a bit of a red flag.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
That blatant display of unexplained wealth shattered the pristine illusion of Delia Prezito's ledgers. The NBI moved in, the operation was busted, and the entire conflict was dragged into the harsh light of the judicial system.
And the transition from the bureaucratic shadows into the courtroom, it required translating the complex reality of the fraud into specific prosecutable charges.
Right. You need a specific crime.
Exactly. The 36 individuals indicted, spanning all the way from the mastermind Mangubot down to the civil engineers and the private contractors, they were all charged with a highly specific compound crime under the revised Penal Code, Estafa through falsification of public documents.
Let's dissect that charge because it merges 2 very distinct legal concepts. We should probably start by defining estafa.
Sure. Estafa, within Philippine jurisprudence, is fundamentally about deceit causing damage. It is actual realized fraud. It consists of any false representation or contrivance where one person overreaches and misleads another, resulting in a tangible detriment. There are 2 indispensable elements. There must be deceit, so actively misleading someone to believe a falsehood is true, and there must be damage.
And in this scenario, the damage is clear. The government was systematically deprived of millions of pesos.
Exactly.
So estafa is basically the theft itself, but accomplished through trickery rather than force.
Yes.
What about the falsification of public documents component? How does that fit in?
Falsification in this context requires 3 specific elements to be proven by the state. First, the offender must be a public officer, employee, or a notary public.
Okay, check. The engineers were public officers.
Second, they must take advantage of their official position.
Check. They used their authority as inspectors.
And third, they must falsify a document by making untruthful statements in a narration of facts.
Which perfectly describes the act of signing a tally sheet for a ghost delivery.
It absolutely does.
You are a public officer. You are utilizing your official authority as an inspector to state a fact that a specific volume of item 310 asphalt was delivered, which you know to be completely untruthful.
Right.
So the 2 crimes are legally inextricably linked here. The falsification of the public document is the necessary means utilized to commit the actual estafa.
Precisely. It is a complex crime where one offense is a necessary avenue to commit the other. You can't steal the money without faking the document. And understanding this charge is really crucial to understanding the defense mounted by the petitioners Fernan and Torrevillas at the Sandigan Bayon, which is the special anti-graft court.
Their defense strategy was fascinating to me because they didn't deny the physical act.
They couldn't.
Right. They couldn't deny signing the documents. Their signatures were preserved in black and white on the tally sheets. The NBI had them. Instead, they attacked the element of criminal intent.
Yes.
They argued that they were innocent because they sincerely, genuinely believed that the tally sheets they were signing were backed by genuine letters of advice of allotment.
Their argument hinged entirely on a claim of bureaucratic ignorance.
We didn't know.
Exactly. They essentially stated, look, we are just field engineers. We were just doing our jobs. A contractor arrived at the site. Paperwork was presented to us. We were assured by our superiors that the projects were funded by legitimate LEAs, and so we signed. We had absolutely no knowledge that the hub at the regional office was orchestrating this massive shadow budget.
To bolster this claim, they made a very specific and honestly very bold assertion during the trial. They claimed that these supposed genuine LAAs, the exact documents that would definitively prove their innocence and show they were acting in good faith, actually existed.
Yes, and not only that they existed, but that they were currently sitting in the evidence lockers of the NBI.
Right. The proof is right there. Go look at it.
And this assertion brings us to a fundamental, absolute bedrock concept in criminal law: the burden of proof. The petitioners heavily criticized the Sandigan-Bayan, arguing that the anti-graft court had completely ignored their constitutional right to be presumed innocent. They contended that the prosecution had failed to conclusively prove the deliveries were ghost deliveries, and had failed to prove the engineers were active participants in the deceit. They said, "You didn't prove we knew about the fake LAAs."
But the Supreme Court, in reviewing the case later, pointed out a massive fatal flaw in their legal strategy regarding those supposedly exculpatory LAAs.
It was a catastrophic procedural error on their part.
What did they do wrong?
Well, it is absolutely true that in a criminal trial, the prosecution bears the burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. Innocent until proven guilty.
However, when the state produces an overwhelming mountain of affirmative evidence, I mean the forged vouchers, the canceled treasury checks, the devastating testimonies of the barangay captains establishing the ghost deliveries, the burden of evidence shifts. The defense cannot simply stand before the court and say, there is evidence out there that clears our names, but we aren't going to show it to you. You have to find it.
The court actually noted that Fernan and Torrevillas relied entirely on their own self-serving and uncorroborated testimonies that these genuine LAAs existed.
Exactly. It was just their word against a mountain of paper and witnesses. And the Supreme Court highlighted the missed opportunity here. If Fernan and Torrevillas truly, genuinely believed that exculpatory LAAs existed in the custody of the NBI, they possessed a powerful legal mechanism to acquire them.
What could they have done?
They could have filed a request for a subpoena ducis tecum.
Let's explain what that is, because it's a critical tool in a trial.
A subpoena ducis tecum is a specific type of court summons. It legally orders a person, an agency, or an organization to produce specific documents, materials, or other tangible evidence for use at a hearing or trial.
Okay.
It is essentially the court utilizing its coercive power to compel the production of evidence.
So if they knew the NBI had the documents, they just had to ask the judge to force the NBI to bring them to court.
Precisely. And the Sandiganan would have readily granted that subpoena to ensure a fair trial. The NBI would have been legally obligated to produce the documents or state under oath they didn't have them, but the defense never asked for it.
They never filed the paperwork?
No. The engineers inexplicably failed to procure the compulsory process to compel the production of the very documents they claimed were the absolute cornerstone of their innocence.
The Supreme Court's logic on this is brutal but fair. He who alleges must prove. You cannot claim that exonerating evidence exists somewhere, refuse to utilize the basic legal tools available to obtain it, and then claim your constitutional rights were violated when the court chooses to believe the massive, tangible body of evidence the state actually brought into the courtroom.
That failure to utilize the subpoena was disastrous for them. But even if they had used it, it likely wouldn't have saved them.
Because there were no real LAAs.
Right, and because the state possessed a devastating weapon of its own. An insider.
Oh, yes.
The prosecution secured the cooperation of Delia Prigito, the accountant III, who was one of the original 4 masterminds at the town and country meeting.
The architect of the account 881-400 ledger manipulation.
Yes, her.
She turned state's witness against the rest of the conspiracy.
She did, and she provided the definitive nail in the coffin. A memorandum of agreement was formalized, and her exhaustive previous testimonies detailing the entire intricate modus operandi of the syndicate were adopted as evidence for this specific case against the engineers.
Wow.
She laid bare the unique, highly technical method by which the malversation was accomplished. Most devastatingly for the petitioners, she explicitly identified the fake LAAs, the fake general vouchers, and the specific fabricated documents that the engineers had signed.
I try to imagine sitting at the defense table, right, basing your entire defense on the claim that you were just an ignorant pawn who thought the paperwork was real, and then watching the chief architect of the accounting fraud take the stand.
It would be terrifying.
Watching her point directly to your signature on a tally sheet and explain exactly how that specific forgery fit into her ledger manipulations. It is completely devastating.
Right.
The defense was entirely unable to refute her testimony.
They couldn't.
But that failure leads us to the final and perhaps most legally significant argument the engineers made to the Supreme Court. They invoked the wheel conspiracy theory.
Yes. Anticipating that the documents would inevitably be proven fake, Fernan and Torrevillas deployed a secondary defense. They argued that even if the tally sheets were for ghost deliveries, they could not be convicted as co-conspirators because the state had completely failed to prove they were explicitly in on the master plan with Mangubat.
Right.
They argued there was absolutely no direct proof of a prior agreement between them and the hub.
Their argument is essentially, look, we are just guys at the bottom of the ladder signing papers in the Cebu 1st District. We never went to the Town and Country restaurant. We never met Mangubat or Priagito. We are entirely disconnected from the masterminds. We are just a single spoke. We don't know the hub.
It is a very common defense in complex multi-party frauds. I didn't know the boss, so I'm not part of the gang. But the Supreme Court utilized this argument to deliver a comprehensive masterclass on the legal doctrine of conspiracy.
How do they break it down?
The court clarified that to establish a conspiracy, the state does not need to produce a signed contract from a smoke-filled room or photographic evidence of a secret handshake.
Right. Criminals don't usually keep meeting minutes.
Exactly. Direct proof of a prior explicit agreement is exceptionally rare because conspiracies are, by their very nature, clandestine. Secrecy and concealment are their defining features.
But if direct proof of an agreement isn't required, how does the state legally prove a conspiracy actually exists?
A conspiracy is legally implied if the state can prove that two or more persons aimed their acts towards the accomplishment of the same unlawful object. The court meticulously examines the conduct of the accused before, during, and after the commission of the crime. If their combined acts, even if apparently independent of each other, are connected and cooperative, indicating a shared unlawful goal, the law deems a conspiracy to exist.
To illustrate how this applies to massive decentralized groups, the court cited a landmark precedent, Estrada v. Sandigan-Bayon, which really delineates the structure of multiple conspiracies. They specifically contrasted a chain conspiracy with a wheel conspiracy. Let's explore that distinction, starting with the chain.
Sure. A chain conspiracy typically involves successive communication and cooperation along a linear path, very much like a legitimate supply chain.
Okay, like a factory line.
Sort of. The classic textbook example is narcotics distribution. You have a manufacturer who reduces the drug. The manufacturer sells to a smuggler who transports it. The smuggler sells to a regional wholesaler who then distributes it to local street dealers.
In that chain, each link generally only interacts with the link immediately preceding and succeeding them, right? The manufacturer in Colombia doesn't know the name of the street corner dealer in Manila. They never communicate.
Never.
But they are absolutely legally part of the exact same conspiracy because they are participating in a continuous process transferring a single illicit commodity.
Exactly. The success of each link depends entirely upon the success of the others. The dealer needs the maker needs the dealer. But the Supreme Court explicitly stated that the Cebu Highway Scam was not a chain.
Oh, it wasn't?
No, it was structurally different. It was a wheel or circle conspiracy.
How does a wheel conspiracy function differently than the chain?
In a wheel conspiracy, you have a single person or a core group. The hub, dealing individually and somewhat independently with two or more other persons or groups, the spokes.
Oh, okay.
In our case, the hub was clearly defined. Mangubat, Priagito, Saison, and Cruz. They centralized and controlled the operation. The spokes were the 30-plus other participants dispersed throughout the region.
It's spread all over.
Yeah. This included the private contractors like Juliana de Los Angeles and Rufino Nunez, and it included the civil engineers like Fernan and Torrevillas.
So the engineers are arguing that because they are merely a single spoke, interacting only with the contractor and their immediate local supervisor, and because they never communicated with the hub or the other spokes, they cannot be held responsible for the entire wheel.
Right. They are trying to limit their liability to their single, isolated act.
And this is where the Supreme Court's logic is so precise and ultimately unyielding.
It really is.
Because in a wheel conspiracy, the state does not need to adduce direct proof that every spoke knew every other spoke, or that every spoke knew the precise mechanics of the hub. The state only needs to adduce proof that the accused committed acts that constitute a vital connection to the conspiracy, or an act done in clear furtherance of its overarching objective.
Which brings the entire case crashing back down onto the tally sheets.
Yes. The court focused intently on the concept of the indispensable act. The entire multi-million peso fraud could not have materialized without those specifically signed tally sheets.
It was the bottleneck of the whole operation.
Exactly. As the state witness, Auditor Ruth Paredes, meticulously explained during the trial, the entire bureaucratic payment process dictates that the delivery receipt and the tally sheet are absolute prerequisites to generate the general voucher. Without the voucher, the disbursing officer possesses no authority to draw the treasury check.
So without Fernan and Torrevillas falsely certifying that asphalt was delivered, the entire assembly line halts. The check cannot be cut. Their seemingly small, localized bureaucratic act, simply putting pen to paper on a mundane government form, was the essential, indispensable linchpin of the entire scam.
The Supreme Court ruled that when every accused individual performs their assigned tasks with precision and the common objective, the illegal release of public funds, is successfully attained, then every person is equally liable as a co-principal.
They are all equally guilty of the main crime.
It is legally irrelevant that Fernan did not know the specific accounting codes Priegio was manipulating in the regional office. It is irrelevant that Torrevillas did not know the precise percentage of the kickback the clerk was extorting. They voluntarily performed an indispensable overt act in furtherance of the common criminal design.
Therefore, the foundational legal maxim of conspiracy applies. The act of one is the act of all.
The act of one is the act of all. That is a profoundly heavy sentence to hear in a courtroom.
It seals their fate.
So what is the final outcome? When the judicial dust finally settled after decades of appeals, the Supreme Court completely affirmed the decision of the Senegan Bayan. The convictions of the engineer stood.
And the penalties levied were severe. For each of the numerous counts of estafa through falsification, they face an indeterminate penalty ranging from over 6 years to over 10 years in prison.
Per count.
Per count. Fernan was convicted on 6 distinct counts. Torrevillas was convicted on 9 counts. Furthermore, they were held solidarily liable in order to indemnify the Republic of the Philippines for the millions of pesos stolen.
It is a stark, sobering reminder that in the world of government bureaucracy and corporate administration for that matter, a signature is never just a formality. It is a loaded weapon.
It really is.
A single stroke of a pen on a routine form can authorize the theft of millions. This ruling completely destroys the defense of, I was just doing what I was told, or I just signed where my boss put the sticky note. You are responsible for what you certify.
But, if we step back from the individual convictions and look at the sheer overarching architecture of this crime, the court made an incredibly profound observation in its ruling.
What was it?
It is a thought regarding the mathematics of corruption that I really want to leave you to mull over. The court noted that if actual deliveries had been made, even if they were wildly substandard deliveries using that cheap limestone we talked about, the suppliers would have still had to incur costs to procure and transport those materials.
Right. Even stealing rocks and moving them with wheelbarrows costs something in labor and time. You had to pay the guys with the shovels.
Exactly. And if they incurred those costs, they wouldn't have generated enough sheer profit to survive the extortion. They couldn't pay a 26% cut to the hub, pay off the district accountants, bribe the local officials, and still make the endeavor actually worth their while.
We are talking about over 30 people indicted in this conspiracy. That is 30 individuals who need a significant bribe just to keep quiet, sign the forms, and keep the paperwork moving down the line.
Precisely. Therefore, a conspiracy of this massive scale mathematically requires the project to be a complete 100% ghost project.
Wow.
The sheer number of people demanding a bribe acts as a structural guarantee that the public will get absolutely nothing for their tax dollars. If they had actually purchased even a single barrel of asphalt, there wouldn't be enough stolen margin left to feed the conspiracy.
That is deeply unsettling. It suggests this terrible paradox in system design.
How do you mean?
Well, the bigger and more complex the bureaucracy required to approve a project, the more individuals you have to bribe to fake that approval. And the more people you have to bribe, the more money you have to steal just to cover the overhead of the corruption.
Right.
It forces us to wonder, is the size of a bureaucracy directly proportional to the audacity of the fraud required to subvert it?
That's the question.
Did the very safeguards designed to prevent a small 100 peso theft mathematically guarantee that when a theft finally happened, it had to be an 86 million peso scam just to pay everyone off?
It is a provocative, systemic question. When the labyrinth of red tape becomes too complex and heavily guarded, the only way to get through it is to buy the Minotaur.
When the labyrinth becomes too complex, the only way through is to buy the Minotaur. I think that perfectly encapsulates the Cebu Highway Scam. And so we circle back to our vanishing fortune, not blowed up in a vault or hauled away in duffel bags, but meticulously typed away on Saturdays, justified by crushed limestone, and hidden in the negative entries of a ledger. Think twice the next time a stack of paperwork lands on your desk and someone casually says, "Don't worry about the details, just sign off on this." You might just be the indispensable spoke in a very expensive wheel. That's our deep dive for today. Keep questioning the paperwork, and we'll catch you next time.
Welcome to the debate. In 1977, the Philippine government lost 86 million pesos to a massive highway scam.
Yeah, which is just an astronomical amount of money for that time.
Oh, absolutely. And the crazy thing is, the entire thing was built not on, broken concrete or shattered steel, but on routine, boring, bureaucratic paperwork. I mean, when a massive structural failure happens, like a bridge collapses or a ship sinks, we can usually point to a cracked beam or a faulty weld.
Right. You have physical proof.
Exactly. But when you step into the world of massive organizational fraud, the points of failure are just ink signatures on Friday afternoon memos. And figuring out whether a signature represents a criminal mastermind at work or just, a tired bureaucrat clearing their desk is incredibly difficult.
It really is. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when you look at systemic institutional failure, separating intentional deceit from mere administrative negligence is, it's one of the hardest things a legal system has to do. Because on paper, they often look completely identical.
Which is exactly why we are focusing today on the infamous Cebu Highway Scam. Specifically, we're examining the 2007 Supreme Court decision that ultimately affirmed the criminal convictions of two mid-level civil engineers, Simon Fernan Jr. and Expedito Torrevillas.
Yeah, this case is so important.
It is, because it forces us to confront a central, extremely uncomfortable question. When lower-level bureaucrats sign falsified documents within a highly sophisticated organizational fraud, does that act inherently prove they were intentional participants in a criminal conspiracy? Or, does our legal system sometimes unfairly punish severe bureaucratic negligence by treating it as intentional deceit?
And the stakes of that question are just enormous. I mean, especially for anyone working within a large organization today.
Exactly. So I will be arguing that the legal doctrine known as the wheel conspiracy correctly categorizes these civil engineers as indispensable intentional participants. Their specific overactions fundamentally enabled the fraud to exist, and the sheer scale of the physical deception makes claims of mere negligence basically impossible.
Okay, and I will argue that inferring criminal intent, the mens rea, the guilty mind, merely from the routine signing of administrative paperwork completely conflates a systemic bureaucratic failure with intentional fraud. By making that leap, we dangerously overextend criminal liability. We basically risk sending people to prison simply for being bad at their jobs.
Well, let's get right into the mechanics of how this scam operated, and this is crucial. The fraud simply doesn't work without deliberate participation at every single level.
Right.
The hub of this conspiracy was the chief accountant of Region 7, Rolando Mangubat, along with his inner circle. But a hub can't move anything without spokes. Mangubat could not steal a single peso without the active participation of people like Fernan and Torrevillas.
Sure, the scale required bodies.
It required their specific signatures. The facts established in court are stark. These engineers signed tally sheets and delivery receipts for massive amounts of what they called ghost deliveries. We are talking about Fernan signing off on 146,000 pesos and Torrevillas for over 337,000 pesos in materials.
Yeah, which again in 1977 was staggering. It was roughly 12.3 million pesos illegally dispersed in the Cebu First Highway Engineering District alone. So the scale is undeniable.
Right. And what exactly were they signing for? Specifically things like item 310, which is bituminous asphalt, materials that the court proved were never actually delivered.
Right. The asphalt was missing. Completely missing.
And the bureaucratic machinery of the Ministry of Public Highways dictated that without those specific signed tally sheets from the engineers, the general vouchers could never be prepared, and without the general vouchers, the treasury checks could not be drawn. So the engineers provided the necessary illusion of physical reality. Therefore, their participation wasn't just a slip of the pen. It was an intentional, indispensable step in a coordinated enterprise.
See, I think you're jumping straight from causality to culpability there. I acknowledge the scale, obviously, but I heavily challenge the presumption of the engineer's criminal intent.
How so?
Well, you have to look at the incredibly sophisticated nature of the core scam to understand why these engineers were convicted of something they likely didn't even understand. Mangubat and his team secretly met at the Town and Country restaurant in Cebu City back in February 1977.
Right, the infamous planning meeting.
Exactly. And they hatched an accounting scheme that was genuinely brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. They spent their weekends typing up fake letters of advice of allotment, or LAA.
Let's pause right there for a second just to clarify for everyone. An LAA is crucial here. It's essentially a blank check from the central government, right? It's the document that authorizes a specific regional district to spend a certain amount of the national budget.
Exactly. It's the absolute genesis of all government spending in that system. So Mangubat's team is manufacturing these fake LAAs. But they know that if they just spend money they don't have, the regional trial balances will eventually show a massive deficit, which would immediately trigger an audit.
Right.
So what do? They manipulated account 811400. Yeah.
That is the ledger account for unliquidated prior year obligations. So by booking the fake expenses against the previous year's unused budget, they completely bypassed the current year's funding limits. And to hide the missing cash, they used negative journal entries.
Okay, break that down for a second. How does a negative journal entry actually hide stolen money in a trial balance? Well, normally, when you disperse funds, you record it as an outflow, right? A positive expense. That adds up, and auditors see the total amount spent. But Mangubat's team took the stolen amounts and enter them as negative numbers.
Wow.
Yeah, mathematically, it literally erased the transactions from the top-level regional view. It made it look to the national auditors like the money had never been touched. And on top of that, they intentionally split the payment vouchers, so every single check was just under 50,000 pesos.
Because that was the threshold.
Exactly. That was the exact threshold that would require the regional auditor's personal scrutiny. It was an absolute masterclass in financial deception.
I agree. It was a brilliantly sinister accounting maneuver. Absolutely. But what does that have to do with the engineers signing for asphalt? That didn't exist.
It has everything to do with it. Fernan and Torrevillas were civil engineers. They were not forensic accountants. They were almost certainly completely ignorant of this high-level financial trickery involving negative journal entries and prior year obligation manipulation.
Okay, but
my position is just that you cannot infer a grand criminal conspiracy to commit fraud simply because mid-level engineers signed off on routine paperwork that was sent down by regional leadership. They were operating in a fundamentally broken system.
I hear the argument about the accounting complexity. I really do. But you are completely ignoring the physical reality of what an engineer actually does.
How so?
Because we aren't talking about minor accounting discrepancies on paper. We are talking about the physical impossibility of their innocence. Let's look at the testimonies of the barangay captains, the local community leaders on the ground, like Macario Limaluma and Remedios Feliciano.
Right.
They testified under oath that no major road works or asphalting ever occurred in their districts during this entire period.
But there was work happening. I mean, the local camineros, the road workers, they were out there.
They were out there patching potholes with crushed limestone. They were gathering anapug, limestone dust, from the side of the road and pushing it around in wheelbarrows. That is rudimentary, almost zero-cost maintenance.
Yeah, but
Yet Fernan and Torrevillas were signing official tally sheets certifying the delivery of thousands of cubic meters of high-grade item 310 bituminous asphalt. I mean, if I sign a receipt saying, a herd of elephants was delivered to my house, I can't later claim it was an administrative oversight when only a single mouse arrives.
okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration.
But the principle holds. How could trained, licensed civil engineers accidentally sign for massive industrial shipments of non-existent asphalt when only limestone dust was being used? This isn't a complex accounting error. It is a physical contradiction staring them right in the face.
You have to contextualize the environment they were working in, though. The Cebu 1st Engineering District was completely overwhelmed by administrative chaos. Remember, the prosecution's own evidence showed that the district was flooded with 84 fake LAAs that were actively mixed in with the legitimate ones.
Right.
The paperwork was entirely divorced from reality. Now, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, how on earth do you miss thousands of tons of missing asphalt?
Exactly. How do you miss that?
Because in a highly dysfunctional bureaucracy where the central office is relentlessly pushing down paperwork for road maintenance that is, broadly speaking, generally occurring, like you said, the local guys are out there fixing potholes, signing off on maintenance documents becomes a routine, almost thoughtless expectation.
Thoughtless is the key word there.
Right, but is it negligence for an engineer to fail to physically travel to every site, measure the volume, and inspect every single cubic meter of material before signing the paper? Yes, it is a severe dereliction of duty.
Absolutely.
But the charge here isn't dereliction of duty. The charge is estafa through falsification of public documents. And under Philippine law, estafa requires active conscious deceit. It requires the intent to defraud. Extreme negligence is just not the same thing as intentional deceit.
But that argument assumes they were just passively signing whatever crossed their desks, completely unaware of the broader context. And this is exactly why the Supreme Court correctly applied the wheel conspiracy framework.
Right, the antitrust concept.
Yes. It's a legal concept primarily used in antitrust and organized crime cases, but it perfectly fits here. The law states that direct proof of a secret agreement isn't necessary to prove a conspiracy. If the accused performed overt acts with what the court called martinet-like precision toward a common unlawful object, they are conspirators.
Martinet-like precision, meaning they acted like basically disciplined soldiers following unstated orders.
Yes. Mangubat was the hub, and the engineers were the spokes. We know from the trial that the fake LAAs were being sold to local contractors for a 26% cut. This wasn't just chaos. It was a well-oiled machine of mutual benefit.
Okay.
Thin air. The hub got their cut, and the engineers greased the wheels. The engineers didn't need to understand what a negative journal entry was. They just needed to play their specific, indispensable role in the scheme, providing the illusion of physical delivery to get their piece of the pie.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are applying the wheel conspiracy framework to the absolute lowest rungs of the ladder while completely ignoring how the hub actually operated at the top.
What do you mean?
Mangubat's core team was so sophisticated that even the Philippine National Bank and the National Bureau of Treasury were fooled.
How were they fooled? They just processed the checks.
They processed millions in treasury checks because Mangubat's team made sure the banks weren't furnished with the master cash disbursement ceilings, the CDCs.
Let's define the CDC for a second.
A cash disbursement ceiling is the master limit document. It tells the bank the absolute maximum amount of money a specific government agency is legally allowed to withdraw in a given period.
Right.
Because Mangubat manipulated the flow of information, the banks had no idea those ceilings were being exceeded. They paid out the cash thinking everything was fully authorized. Now, if the top national banks in Manila and the highest-level regional auditors were successfully deceived by Mangobot's accounting genius, it is entirely plausible, even highly likely, that the mid-level engineers in Cebu were also unwitting dupes.
Yeah, I just don't see the equivalence there.
Why do we automatically assume the banks were innocent victims of complex fraud, but the civil engineers were intentional, malicious co-conspirators? It's like a quality assurance inspector at a shipping plant who signs off that 100 sealed boxes of electronics are ready for transport, completely unaware that the factory manager secretly emptied the boxes and filled them with bricks the night before.
That is a very specific analogy, but let me tell you exactly why the bank tellers in Manila and the civil engineers in Cebu are not the same thing at all.
Okay, why?
The bank tellers in Manila weren't expected to physically walk down the highways of Cebu to verify that the asphalt was laid. The civil engineers were. The engineers were literally the booth on the ground. Their entire professional mandate was to bridge the gap between the paperwork and the physical reality of the road.
But
let me just add, state witness Delia Priagido, who was the accountant 3 and part of Mangubet's inner circle, testified to the exact modus operandi. The fake LAAs generated fake general vouchers, which were supported by these very tally sheets. Without the engineers legally certifying the physical delivery, the accounting fraud just dies on the vine.
But you are still relying on a massive leap of inference. You're saying that because their signatures were functionally necessary for the fraud to succeed, they must have possessed criminal intent. That conflates causality with culpability.
I disagree.
Going back to my factory inspector analogy, the inspector's signature is functionally necessary for the truck full of bricks to leave the warehouse. Without his signature, the guard doesn't open the gate. But his negligence in failing to open the boxes doesn't make him guilty of conspiring to steal the electronics.
Well, I am not convinced by that line of reasoning because it conveniently ignores the actual trial. Specifically, the burden of proof and the glaring missing evidence. Let's look at how the engineers defended themselves when they were finally backed into a corner in court.
Okay.
What was their defense? They didn't claim, oh, we were just rubber stamping things and didn't know. No, they claimed that the specific tally sheets they signed were actually backed by genuine legal LAAs.
Yes, they claimed the legitimate paperwork existed.
Right. They claimed these genuine documents were sitting in the custody of the National Bureau of Investigation, the NBI.
Which, if true, would completely exonerate them. It would prove the specific projects they signed for were actually funded.
Exactly. It would blow the prosecution's case out of the water. But when it came time to prove it in court, they failed to issue a subpoena ducis tecum. For the listener, a subpoena ducis tecum is a specific court summons that orders the recipient to produce physical evidence or documents. The engineers had the legal power to compel the NBI to bring those exonerating LEAs into the courtroom. And they just didn't do it.
Well, because they likely didn't have the resources or the legal coordination.
No, it's because there is an age-old legal axiom. He who alleges something must prove it. Their entire defense rested on self-serving, uncorroborated testimony that completely crumbled against the hard, documentary evidence presented by the state.
I mean, legal procedure is complicated.
But why wouldn't you issue the subpoena? Because if the NBI opens the vault and the documents aren't there, your defense instantly self-destructs. If the documents proving your innocence exist and you have the legal mechanism to force their production and you fail to do so, well, the court can only logically conclude those documents do not exist.
Look, that's a highly compelling procedural argument, I'll give you that. But have you considered the philosophical and constitutional implications of that stance? In any criminal prosecution, the absolute highest principle is the presumption of innocence.
Sure.
The burden of proving a conspiracy should fall entirely, 100%, on the state. What did the prosecution actually prove? They proved the engineers signed documents containing false information about asphalt deliveries. But did they prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the engineers knew the overarching LAAs driving the entire district's budget were fake?
They proved the asphalt wasn't there.
Right, but did they prove the engineers received a 26% cut of the money? Did they show a paper trail of bribes going into Fernan or Torrevillas' bank accounts? No. Relying on the engineers' failure to subpoena documents is a deeply convenient way for the state to lower its own burden of proving actual intentional complicity.
I wouldn't say they lowered their burden.
It essentially shifts the burden onto the accused to prove their own ignorance of a scheme designed by financial experts specifically to be invisible.
Well, the state doesn't have to prove they understood the accounting mechanics, and the state doesn't need a photograph of them accepting a bag of cash. The state only had to prove deceit and damage, which are the two elements of estafa.
But where is the deceit?
The deceit was making it appear that materials were delivered when they weren't, utilizing their positions as public officers to legitimize the lie. The damage was the millions of pesos paid out of the public treasury to suppliers for thin air. The engineers were the ones who legally certified that the thin air was in fact solid asphalt. That is deceit.
Or again, it's extreme administrative negligence in an environment where everybody was rubber stamping everything because the regional leadership had completely abandoned its oversight duties.
Yeah.
By convicting the engineers of the complex crime of estafa, the court is demanding a level of situational awareness from mid-level employees that simply did not exist anywhere in the Ministry of Public Highways in 1977. You are asking them to have been the sole point of integrity in a system that was rotten from the very top.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the dirt roads of Cebu to the ledgers of the National Treasury. Let me summarize where I stand. The scale of the ghost deliveries in the Cebu Highway Scam makes the defense of mere negligence logically untenable. We are not talking about a misplaced decimal point or a slight miscalculation of volume. We are talking about certifying the delivery of thousands of tons of non-existent materials over an extended period. The indispensable nature of the engineers' signatures perfectly justifies their conviction for the complex crime of estafa through falsification.
Right.
The wheel conspiracy doctrine isn't just an abstract legal theory. It is a vital, necessary tool to dismantle systemic corruption. In an organization where every participant plays a crucial role, claiming ignorance while actively turning the key that opens the vault cannot be a shield against criminal liability.
And I maintain that while the Cebu Highway Scam was undoubtedly a catastrophic failure of government controls, inferring a criminal conspiracy solely from administrative signatures sets a deeply dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
It risks punishing the lowest rungs of a bureaucracy for the highly sophisticated financial sins of its highest officers. When a system is engineered to be opaque, as Mengobats was, assuming that mid-level workers understand the fraudulent holes simply because they process the corrupted parts is a leap too far.
I see your point.
The state must bear the burden of proving intent. We must fiercely protect the line between gross administrative incompetence and intentional criminal deceit, lest we start putting people in prison simply because they were overwhelmed, negligent, and bad at their jobs.
There is no question this case forces us to reflect on the dark brilliance and, frankly, the utter devastation of the fraud committed in Region 7. This scheme perfectly illustrates how vulnerabilities in a system's accounting controls can be mercilessly exploited from the inside out.
Yet, leveraging the routine habits of the bureaucracy against itself.
Exactly.
It certainly highlights the staggering complexity of holding individuals accountable within massive failing institutions. I mean, there is so much more to explore in the historical record of this case, particularly in how we design systemic safeguards today so that a single signature doesn't carry the weight of an $86 million fraud.
Absolutely. Ultimately, we are brought right back to our opening thought. When the massive machinery of a government bureaucracy breaks down and millions of dollars vanish, we inevitably go searching for the point of fracture. But as the ink dries on the ledgers of the Cebu Highway Scam, we are left to ask, where exactly is the line drawn between being a flawed bureaucrat swept up in a broken machine and being a willing participant in a criminal enterprise?
We will now summarize and conclude our discussions in this video, which examines the Cebu Highway Scam, a significant case of corruption involving millions of pesos, as detailed in the legal records of GR number 145,927. The scale of the fraud was massive. 36 former officials were implicated across 119 criminal cases involving 86 million pesos in stolen government funds. The government's legitimate financial architecture relied on a series of checks and balances, from the Ministry of Budget down to the regional and district offices. The syndicate bypassed these controls by injecting fake documents, splitting vouchers to avoid oversight, and creating the illusion of funding for non-existent projects. To cover their tracks, accountants manipulated trial balances and journal vouchers, effectively zeroing out irregularities to make the books appear balanced. The Supreme Court applied the wheel conspiracy doctrine. It establishes that in systemic corruption, one does not need to prove a secret meeting. Performing an overt act connects an individual to the core of the fraud. At the hub of the scheme were 4 individuals from the Ministry of Public Highways, including accountants and examiners, who orchestrated the creation and sale of fake allotment documents. The spokes were civil engineers who enabled the fraud by providing the appearance of reality, signing off on fake inspection reports and delivery receipts for materials that never arrived. This diagnostic matrix highlights the significant footprint of the petitioners, showing the number of criminal convictions, funds defrauded, and falsified documents attributed to each. The Supreme Court noted that the signatures of these engineers were the indispensable trigger mechanism. Without their verification of physical delivery, the vouchers and treasury checks could not be processed. While millions were officially disbursed on paper for road rehabilitation, testimonies from local leaders confirmed the reality. No major repairs were made, and the asphalt never existed. Legally, this was charged as estafa through falsification. Under the complex crime doctrine, the act of falsification served as the necessary means to commit the fraud. The defense failed because it relied on self-serving testimony rather than compelling production of the documents they claimed would prove their innocence. In synthesis, the fraud relied on deceit at the hub, active participation by the spokes, and the resulting damage, which drained the treasury and left infrastructure in ruins. The final verdict affirmed the convictions. The Supreme Court underscored that within a wheel conspiracy, the act of one becomes the act of all.